Warning. Tongue and Geek contains heavy spoilers. If you haven't read, watched, or played the content being reviewed this episode, know that we will definitely spoil major plot points. Also, this show isn't for kids. We use words like and and it would take too much time and effort to edit them all out. Please don't tell our moms. Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to Tongue and Geek, where two more white guys on the internet give their unsolicited opinions on all things geeky. I'm Isaac.
I'm Tyler.
And today we're reviewing Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, released from 2002 to 2007, and starring Tobey Maguire, James Franco, and Kirsten Dunst. Tyler, you want to give us some background on these films?
Okay. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. The year is 2002.
Oh, boy.
The year is 2002, and little Tyler was very, very excited. So excited, to this day, Spider-Man 2002 holds the record for most seen in theater movie for little Tyler.
What was the number?
The number was 7 times.
Wow.
Yeah, I was hyped to the gills for this movie. But we'll get into my hype a little later. The background to the first live-action Spider-Man movie is incredibly detailed and goes back decades. If you care about like researching any of this kind of geeky shit, so many superhero movies just have so many unknown histories as far as like development hell is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of them. And Spider-Man's is really interesting because they've been trying to get a Spider-Man movie made since the early 80s. The first attempt was with Roger Corman, who, all you cinephiles out there, Roger Corman is like the king of like low budget independent cinema. He started so many careers, but this isn't about Roger Corman. This is about Spider-Man. So Roger Corman was the first to try to take a crack at it. And Stan Lee himself was actually going to write the script. Well, he did write the script. It was pretty traditional for a Spider-Man story. Doc Ock was the main villain, you know, Aunt May, Uncle Ben, Radioactive Spider, all that.
Yeah.
But, you know, as you can probably surmise, budgetary concerns, that dissolved. And then later the rights went to the Cannon Group, which cinephiles, you probably know who the Cannon Group is. They are known for a bunch of low-budget 80s action movies and horror movies and comedies. Hundreds and hundreds of movies were produced by Cannon before they went bankrupt. This one is really funny because the main dude behind it, I can't remember if it was like a duo, Mannheim Golan and Jorm Globus. They didn't quite understand who the hell Spider-Man was. They just, you know, Spider-Man, we make Spider-Man. He's this man who spider. they thought he was like a werewolf character, essentially.
Oh.
So
that would be cool.
It was Spider-Man in name only, about an evil scientist who was conducting experiments on people to transform them into bugs. Peter Parker gets slowly transformed into a human tarantula. And originally, Tobe Hooper, who is the recently deceased horror filmmaker of Texas Chainsaw Massacre fame, Poltergeist fame, all kinds of classics, he was slated to shoot it. He dropped out, and then another genre filmmaker came on board. And then the script changed again to something a bit more traditional, what you would expect. Again, more budget problems. That fell through because they just wanted to keep cutting the cost. The thing that came closest to happening was James Cameron in the early 90s. Yeah, the James Cameron. Titanic,
wow.
Avatar, Terminator was gonna make a Spider-Man movie. It's kind of famous among the fandom for having a sex scene between Peter and Mary Jane.
Oh my gosh.
A sex scene on the Brooklyn Bridge, I believe it was.
Wow.
Yeah. And there was cursing.
What?
There was cursing
in a
the movie.
Comic book film?
Yes.
Unheard of.
Profanity. But for the most part, it seemed like a pretty traditional Spider-Man story.
You tell me the New Yorkers cuss? You talking me? You go on the Brooklyn Bridge and they go fuck around out in there? You tell me they talk like trash? I just lost all our New York fans. Fuck.
Yeah. Hey, Spider-Man, I see you up there fucking. Good fucking Spider-Man.
Yeah. Shoot that web fluid, Spider-Man.
Really stick it to us, Spidey. Yeah. Anyway. Electro and Sandman were going to be the villains. They were kind of reimagined as Electro was like sort of a Kingpin-esque character and Sandman was his lackey. What I find most interesting about this is that it would have been directed by James Cameron, which means the production values would have been fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Especially like considering he's pushed like CGI forward numerous times with his films. And Leonardo DiCaprio was in consideration for the role.
Huh.
So a young Leo could have, in an alternate universe, could be our Spider-Man.
Maybe that would have got him his Oscar earlier.
Yep. Titanic had to come along. They had to move on to Titanic instead of Spider-Man.
I would say that was probably a bad choice.
I don't know.
I think in the long run, they really regretted that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Considering the millions and millions that this trilogy made, they really regretted it.
Yeah.
Fast forward, late 90s, a lot of boring, behind the scenes financing bullshit. Tim Burton was sought after. Chris Columbus, who made the first two Harry Potters. David Fincher, M. Night Shyamalan. They were all potential directors.
Ugh.
And then they finally...
it wasn't Shyamalan.
Yeah, but this is before...
true, I guess.
This is before he ruined Avatar and made a slew of terrible movies. They finally settled on Sam Raimi because he was a big fan and his passion got him the job. Fast forward to 2002, the movie's coming out. Like I said, I was incredibly excited. I didn't read comics as a kid. That came later.
Now, Tyler,
but
before we get into your personal background, I think we need to address, you missed a very important part of this live-action Spider-Man history, and that was the Japanese Spider-Man series that ran from 1978 to 1979, where Spider-Man piloted a giant robot known as Leopardon, and which predated the Super Sentai franchise, which would become Power Rangers in the West.
Yeah, the Japanese Spider-Man show was like one of the first Super Sentai shows.
The precursor to Power Rangers and Super Sentai.
It was technically Spider-Man.
Yes.
Emissary from Hell.
Emissary from Hell, Spider-Man, who uses, like, guns and shit. But anyway, continue with your background.
There was also an American-produced 70s Spider-Man show that only lasted 13 episodes. But anyway, I didn't read comics much as a kid, but I watched all the superhero cartoons, and the Spider-Man cartoon from the 90s was one of my absolute favorites. When I saw this movie, one of my friend's parents took a group of us after school, and it blew all of our goddamn minds. It's hard to explain to, like, younger viewers, because 2002 was already a long goddamn time ago.
It was almost 20 years. Next year,
it's a lifetime ago.
20 years.
It's hard to explain the impact that movie had.
Yeah.
Beforehand, there had been Blade, which, even though nobody knew was a comic book movie, it kind of reinvigorated Marvel as a brand and saved them from bankruptcy just a little bit so they could keep going.
Yeah.
And then X-Men came in 2000, and that was a big hit, and that saved them a little more. But then Spider-Man really blew the doors off. At the time, it was the first movie to pass $100 million in its first weekend at the box office. And also at the time, it was the 6th highest grossing movie of all time. Audience they just hadn't seen visuals like this in a superhero movie or a blockbuster before. CGI had been around, of course. Big effects had been around, of course. Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, The Abyss, that kind of stuff. But like fully rendered, a superhero character, swinging through cities on webs, crawling walls and stuff, like that was just something new.
Yeah.
It was awesome to see. And it took the world by storm. And for a while there, the first two Spider-Man movies were like some of my favorite movies ever. And so I can shut up a little bit. Let's get some of your sort of
So I was in a very similar boat to you. I was very young at this point. I would have been, 7 when this movie came out. Real young. So I wasn't a huge comic reader at this point. My parents, I think, gave me some of the big like the Marvel Essentials that have like the black and white copies of some of the earliest print comics. So I was familiar with these characters, and like you, I'd also seen the 90s Spider-Man because reruns showed all the time, and I liked it. But hearing about this movie coming out, I wasn't like super familiar with the character or anything. Like I wasn't super familiar with who Spider-Man was supposed to be. This was my introduction to like Spider-Man's origin story and like the essential concept of what Spider-Man was. Because I had like seen a few comics here and there of Spider-Man, and I'd seen the cartoon and whatnot. But like I didn't watch the cartoon like start to finish. I just saw it whenever the reruns came on. This was the one that like established like this is who Spider-Man is to me. So like this movie was a big deal for me because it was also the one that solidified what superhero movies were going to be like moving forward. At that point in time, I think I had seen, I don't know if I had actually seen X-Men or not. I might have seen X-Men later down the line. But X-Men was, I feel like, was targeted a little more towards like a slightly older audience, like a teenage audience, with like them wearing all their like black jumpsuits and everything instead of like their comic accurate things.
Yeah,
and
it was more muted and subdued.
There was some more disturbing visuals with like, I remember there was a guy who like melts at one point when he gets mutated, and Wolverine having claws and everything. He was a bit more violent. With Spider-Man, even though there's some wacky sort of violence in this movie, it was a lot more targeted towards like a general audiences sort of thing. Like, hey, you can take your kids to go see Spider-Man, or hey, you can comic fans come see Spider-Man. It was much more targeted to like, this is a movie for everybody to learn about Spider-Man. And this was the movie that really established like how important superhero films were going to be moving forward. And it really does like set the bar of like, from this point on, superhero movies are going to be a big deal.
Yeah. And I'd say right out of the gate, it had something to prove.
Oh, yeah.
Because how do you tell this story? How do you tell it well? How do you tell it in a way that people are going to respond to it?
In a way that general audiences are going to pick up on and engage with. Because it's hard to sell comics to, like, the common movie watcher. Because they're so bizarre in the world they have. A teenager gets bit by a radioactive spider, and instead of dying in the hospital, he develops superpowers, decides to become a professional wrestler with that, learns a serious lesson about responsibility when his uncle dies, and then wears a bunch of tights, and then swings around the city to fight crime. Like, that's a hard pitch.
Yeah, and it sounds silly talking about how hard that is now, because superhero movies have been the dominant form of entertainment for over a decade now.
Yeah.
Not just in movies, but like they're huge on television now too.
Mm-hmm.
And like for people who are younger, like it's hard to imagine like a pre-MCU world where superhero movies weren't a guarantee, you know?
Yeah.
But before that, before the X-Men movie and the Spider-Man movie, like the only superhero movies that had any kind of success were the Batman movies and the Superman movies. And they both ended on a terrible whimper, like, and basically killed their franchises and the superhero genre for a while anyway.
It was those two, and it was like to a much smaller degree movies like Blade, like you said, that were a little less targeted towards general audiences and more towards like a niche. Like Blade was very much like, here's a vampire hunter and we're going to get real violent with it and everything. It wasn't targeted towards like, here's superheroics going on.
Yeah.
It was much more like, this is a vampire movie that just happens to be owned by Marvel Comics, you know?
Right. Let's get into nitty-gritty thoughts. Even as a kid, like I said, I was obsessed with them. And Spider-Man 3, when it came out, kind of killed it for me. But we'll get to that later.
Let's start with 1. Yeah, let's focus on 1 for now.
And because Spider-Man 3 kind of killed it for me, I hadn't watched the other 2 in years and years and years. So when we sat down to watch these again a couple weekends ago.
Wait, that was the latest? You stopped watching after Spider-Man 3 come out? You never revisited after that?
I honestly don't think, like, I think the last time I really sat down to watch any of the 3 was when the third one came out on DVD.
Oh my gosh.
Because I for a while, I wanted to kind of convince myself I liked Spider-Man 3 more than I did.
Oh my.
So I got the DVD to complete my trilogy, watched it a couple times with them, and then just kind of went on to other things, other superhero movies, and like since then, no, I really hadn't
That was 2007. That's crazy.
I know, because a year later, here comes Iron Man, here comes The Dark Knight, here comes...
That's true.
The doors get busted wide open for a new era of these movies.
Yeah.
So, like, I just kind of never look back, even though they still have a huge fan base to this day. They're still beloved. But I just never kind of took the time to go back to see if they held up to me.
Yeah, there's sort of this ongoing, view of them now as, like, charming relics of the past. Oh, how quaint that we are all in love with these Spider-Man movies when we've come so much farther. And, like, to an extent, we'll get into it when we talk about it. To an extent, that's true. But also, like, go back and revisit these films and form your own opinion on them, because there are some elements in these movies that really hold up and are really, like, refreshing to look back on, because a lot of superhero movies nowadays have developed trends and tropes that we see repeated over and over, especially in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that hadn't been, like, established here yet. So these movies take a few chances and do things in a way that's sort of refreshing to look back on, when it's like we weren't tied down by this sort of, like, tropes that exist now for superhero films.
Yeah. And I think overall, I don't want to bury the lead, I think overall I enjoyed the experience way more than you did, even though you did have a good time.
I enjoyed the experience, but we'll talk about that. Let's start with number one, because I think we're both very much in the same camp here. We rewatched Spider-Man 1, and I think we both fell in love with Spider-Man 1 again.
Yeah, we completely again. I was afraid that I would find it too campy, too cheesy, too goofy, because I guess that was kind of how I saw them in my mind after not having seen them for so long.
Yeah.
But I'll be damned if it's just not a really well-told 2-hour origin story. Yeah, like, they are corny, but it's a very purposeful corny. Like, Sam Raimi knows what he's doing. If you know his style and his filmmaking language, like, it's completely purposeful. It's very inspired by the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko seminal run of the comic. This movie just kind of pops. It's got so much personality. It's got so much vibrancy to it.
Yeah.
And even though everything's been memed to death, like, it's so quotable, like, in a good way. It
really is.
And a goofy way. Like,
yeah.
You can't not watch this and smile.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so much fun. Like, as simple as that sounds, it's fun.
I'm something of a scientist myself.
Just myself.
Out am I? A lot of ones from the Green Goblin in particular here.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Because superhero movies are, like, skew really long now, and I'm not one to bitch about long movies. Like, no good movie can be too long, no bad movie can be too short. But superhero movies go past 2 hours routinely now, and it's refreshing to see an origin story superhero movie be, like, a concise just 2 hours and tell, like, a full story with multiple character arcs in a concise manner. You understand who Peter Parker is in this movie in 5 minutes flat.
Yeah.
Like, completely.
Yeah.
And even without his silly opening
you want to know who I am?
Monologue.
You really want to know? It's not a story for the faint of heart.
He's running after the bus. He's wearing glasses, typical nerd garb. He's pasty. He's sweaty. Even the nerds on the bus don't want him sitting next to him.
Yeah.
They're all denying him. The girl he loves, Mary Jane, is dating a dick. And, like, before he utters a line of dialogue himself that's not voiceover, you understand who this character is and kind of what he feels like inside. As goofy as Tobey Maguire is, I think in this first one specifically, he does a really good job of endearing you to him and getting you on his side and making him likable.
We'll get into this a bit with the sequels, but I think what makes it work so well here in the first one is that we do see Peter Parker pre-Spider-Man here. Like, for the first third of the movie almost, he's, like, without his powers and everything, or at least the first 20, 30 minutes. It's really refreshing to see this character without his powers, without his dynamic set up yet, because we see just how far down in the social ladder he is, and just how, like, he's mad simping for this girl. He's got, like, no friends except for one who's a dick to him, and that's Harry Osborn. He's just so down on his luck, Peter Parker, and there's an element to it that I think later in the trilogy gets a little obnoxious, but at this point, you're just immediately endeared to like, oh man, this guy's just trying his best to make it through high school. I remember high school. It was shitty. Yeah, I remember being like that and dealing with this stuff. Man, I really do feel for this guy. And I think what these movies capture, for better and worse, is a real sense of sincerity. Like, as over the top and goofy and cornbally as they can be at times, like, there's a very real sincerity with these films trying to, like, make you feel what these characters are going through. They don't have, like, sort of the MCU's sort of snarky, quippy, like, distance at times. Whenever a character says something or gets mad about something, like, they are screaming. They may make, like, a face that's so overly, like, dramatic that it's funny, but, like, also, like, you can tell that they're trying to convey a sincere emotion. There's a genuine sense that, like, even when this movie is being too hammy, it's being hammy in a way where it wants you to feel what it's trying to show.
Yeah, and in that way, it's Sam Raimi, again, sincerely just kind of interpreting those old school comics, like, as he remembers them, as he sees them.
Yeah.
Because old school comic books, they're soap operas, man.
Yeah, it's a lot of melodrama, it's a lot of hammy acting, and a lot of... It's very much like a very big exaggeration of life.
Mm-hmm. And what makes it work is just introducing characters that have that little nugget of relatability to them. And that's what makes you suspend disbelief and embrace the tone and style and fantasy of it all. And I think what this does really good as well is sort of just tell the dual origin of Spider-Man and Green Goblin.
Yeah.
Back to back. Just with Peter Parker, you get a sense of who Norman Osborn is really quickly without it being like too on the nose exposition-y.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. He's dropping Harry, his son, off at school in his fancy Rolls Royce, and they just have a quick exchange. You can tell Norman is like, he just doesn't understand his son. Wants his son to step up and try to start acting like he does, who he is, and all that. And Harry introduces him to Peter, and there's like this instant just like, Harry, you're not my son now. Peter Parker, the scientist, is my son.
I'm still thinking of a scientist myself.
Because Peter strokes his ego.
Yeah.
He doesn't mean to stroke his ego. Peter's just being sincere Peter Parker, like, you're Norman Osborn. I read your research and you're brilliant. Oh, gee golly gosh. You know, Norman Osborn being Norman Osborn, like, oh.
Quick side
Who's
point.
this now?
Quick side point. I love how in this films they're super duper vague on their pseudoscience bullshit.
I know.
They don't even try. Like, Peter's getting a degree in science when he goes to college in one of the later movies. It's like, okay, great. And they'll occasionally throw in some pseudoscience babble, but it's like, they don't even try to make you realize, like, how the radioactive spider works or any of, like, the mutations and stuff people undergo. It's just like, we'll just throw in some sci-fi stuff at the wall. Like, yeah, exactly. It's like, who cares?
It doesn't matter. Yeah. Like, that's how it was in the comics, you know? The spider's radioactive. That's all you need to know.
Of course it gives superpowers.
Gamma rays turn you into a big green rage thing.
Exactly.
Make you blind and can give you, like, a sixth sense, and, you know, and that's how it works.
We showed you a quick CGI of a DNA strand getting mutated. What more do you want?
Visual storytelling. Yeah. It's so good. I feel like we're kind of talking shit here, but at the same time, it's like all of this stuff is super refreshing because you've got these immediately recognizable character tropes that are being played sort of straight, but like they're done so in such a... God, it's not like a super creative, unique way, but it's being done in a way that's so honest and true to those tropes that like you can't help but like enjoy it. It's like it shows a love for these kinds of characters, not just the specific character of like Peter Parker himself, but like the love of the trope for every like down on his luck, you know, social outcast who doesn't fit in. Even though, and this is one of my bigger problems with the sequels, even though I don't think MJ's a very good character in a lot of ways.
She's not.
I do think, for the most part, the first movie does a really decent job of kind of that initial connection between the two. They have a bit of decent chemistry. It's all down to that scene in the backyard where they, have a first kind of heart-to-heart.
Mm-hmm.
For as big and over the top as these movies are, they have a lot of really good. They have a lot of really good moments of subtle character depth and nuance.
At times.
at times when it needs to. Peter's taking out the trash. You just hear arguing in the house next door. It sounds pretty mean. Sounds pretty nasty. MJ comes out crying. You don't see the wife beater dad smacking anybody around or anything like that. But just Peter overhearing all of that and seeing MJ's reaction is enough to tell you, oh, she's got it bad,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she's dating the bully Flash because, she's insecure and she likes the attention, and status that he gives her and stuff like that, even though you can tell maybe she wants more. All that kind of stuff can be read into it if you want to look.
I would argue that Mary Jane is at her best when you have to read into her. The less we know about her as a character, the more interesting and endearing she is. And as we learn more about her as we go on, it gets a little worse.
I'll make some excuses later on, but that's later on.
Yeah. I will say about MJ in this first movie, I do agree that we do get a good sense of what her home life is and how much she's going through at this point. And we get a good love triangle between her, Peter, and Harry, because Harry had the courage and the social status to ask her out, but Harry also doesn't know anything about romance because his model for romance, his father, is divorced his wife or something, and no real connection to his mother or real explanation of where she is, and he's really distant to his son. Whereas Peter doesn't have the social prowess or the confidence to ask out MJ, and is mad simp in this whole movie. But there's much more of a sincerity with Peter. Even though he's not confident enough to tell MJ outright how he feels, everything that he says to her comes from a place of honesty and encouragement and just a genuine sense of wanting to see her happy, at least in this point in the story, that you don't see out of any of the other characters that are with MJ. So we immediately get connected into the MJ-Peter romance just because, out of all the people we see interact with MJ, Peter is the only one who shows her a genuine sense of I care about you and I want you to be happy instead of using you as a way to make myself happy.
Yeah. And I think Harry loves her in the way that only that Harry can. It's not the right, but he just doesn't know how. He doesn't really see the MJ that Peter sees and knows.
Right.
And there's kind of this through line of these three characters, Peter, MJ, and Harry, just trying to make it on their own out of high school. And just this transitional phase in all three of their lives. And sort of how their parental figures and their parental relations kind of inform who they are.
Yeah.
Peter comes from the loving home, the parental unit, Uncle Ben and Aunt May. So he's kind of got the more well-adjusted approach to relationships, and only to a point because, superhero's got a superhero and secret identity's got a secret identity.
Yeah, and we'll get to that.
But you can tell MJ's just kind of looking for connection and looking for validation and looking to be seen. And you can tell Harry just, it's kind of being performative.
Yeah. It's
And,
almost
so
he wants a relationship in order to feel like he's worthy of being loved.
Yeah, right. Because Daddy Norman, Papa Goblin, is not going to give it to him.
Yeah. All three of them have daddy issues, just in different ways.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of daddy issues, you want to talk about the whole Uncle Ben, Peter Parker thing?
Yes, we have to. You can't not. This is it was already a saying in the comics beforehand, but this was the movie that made the phrase "with great power comes great responsibility" into like a household phrase that people will use now. So everyone, I think, in the world knows that Uncle Ben is like the one character in comics who has stayed dead, who will not return.
Like, really, like, the only one off the top of my head I can think of who has really stayed dead.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, like, I think there's alternate storylines where he comes back.
But like, main continuity.
Yeah, he's dead. He ain't coming back. In case there's like one person out there who clicked on a Spider-Man review with no idea of who Spider-Man was or what's going on, Uncle Ben notices all these changes with Peter. He's noticing that Peter's going through some changes with his powers and everything. He just attributes it to puberty, and he's like, "Hey, son, we need to have a talk. With great power comes great responsibility." Peter's like, "Oh, yeah, okay, bro. I'm gonna go beat up some wrestlers. I'm gonna go beat up Macho Man Randy Savage and get myself $3,000.
No, it's Bonesaw McGraw. It's Bonesaw McGraw, not Macho Man. I know they look alike, but...
Very confusing. And get myself $3,000 so I can buy myself a car. But then, when Peter gets cheated out of some money from the wrestling ring, he lets a robber go out of just being petty. He's like, "Hey, you didn't give me my money, so I'm going to let this guy run with the money." And it turns out the robber kills Uncle Ben. And
what?
Peter is left with this lasting guilt of letting Ben's killer get away and, you know, being responsible for his uncle's death. That is one of the most important aspects of Peter Parker, not just in this film, but in, like, his entire comics run. Like, that is the defining moment that makes him into Spider-Man. And I think this movie is probably the best cinematic version of this that we see. At least the most iconic. Like, I can't think of a version that we've seen. I mean, like, in the comics themselves, obviously, but in terms of, like, a film adaptation, I don't think we're going to get a more straight to the heart of this idea than this film presents. You get, like...
Yeah.
You get the speech between them, you get Peter walking out, and when he sees Uncle Ben in the street, Uncle Ben doesn't say any, like, nice final words to Peter as he's dying there in the street. He's just, like, saying, Peter. He's like basically just saying Peter's name over and over as he's gasping for breath, and Peter just sobbing, like ugly crying over him, which people make fun of that face now, but this is something I want to talk about too in terms of the acting in these movies. Yes, it is hammy. Yes, a lot of it is sort of like over the top cornbally, but like I said earlier, there's a sincerity to it that's very powerful, and I think seeing these characters have these very, very strong emotional reactions to things is like, it's something we don't get as often in modern superhero movies, because everybody's trying to go for the more subtle angle where, like, oh, we're trying to show this, like, the way this character is taking this in subtly and, like, with silence and, you know, or maybe they're trying to cover it up with, like, a snarky quip or something, and it's like, in these movies, you see Peter scream, you see him sob, you see all of these characters have these really very real, raw emotions that, like, yeah, they kind of feel over the top now, but in the moment, like, it's very, like, it's a very honest sort of movie where it's like, here's what the character's feeling in the moment. You're not unclear on what you're supposed to feel. And it's not like the movie's, like, forcing it down your throat. It's like, be sad, be sad. It's more like, there's no playing games at like, oh, maybe there's something else going on. Not trying to be purposefully ambiguous. It's trying to show you exactly what the theme and message of the movie is in the moment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it goes back to what we were saying about sincerity. And I don't want us to sound like we're poo-pooing on like the MCU.
No.
And their brand of filmmaking. But one of the bigger complaints people have about them is that, like, so much of it leans back on that snark, on that wit, on that kind of tongue-in-cheek, like, wink, wink. Hey, we know this is kind of silly, guys. You can laugh with us so you can enjoy this movie more, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's not what these movies are going for. They want those big emotions because it's a big story. It's a big sci-fi fantasy superhero story. Mm-hmm. So the human moments have to be big, too. And I remember telling you when Uncle Ben was dying, I was like, oh man, like this shit used to get me so hyped when I was a kid. This used to get me going. Like Peter, like Uncle Ben is dying in his arms. Peter is weeping. He hears the police box, the radio, like, suspected,
Yeah.
and, like, score starts playing, and then he gets this look of, like, resolve and revenge on his face, and then he books it down an alley, and the camera's just following him,
and he's
as
changing
he's putting on his makeshift mask, and it's just one long shot, and then he leaps onto the building, and he starts spider crawling. It's like, I got chills as a kid every time I watched it, because it's just such a perfect, like, oh shit moment. Like, here he is, like the birth of Spider-Man.
The music in this movie really helps sell it too.
Oh, the score's fantastic.
The score's fantastic, and it does such a good job at, like, shifting between the moods and scenes. Like you just said, like, the music shifts from, like, this sad, sort of subdued, somber music while, like, Peter's looking down on Uncle Ben, and then we get, like, that note on the police scanner of them being, like, suspect heading this way, and then you just feel it, like, move from this sad, somber tone to, like, this intense, like, chase scene of, like, Peter's pissed and he's gonna hunt this guy down. Like, it does such a good job at conveying the mood of the scene.
This goes back to just, like, images you hadn't seen before that blew us away when it came out. Like, now you can poo-poo on the CGI for being dated, and it is dated.
Mm-hmm.
But because these movies are older, it's not just pure CGI. Like, there's a lot of practical effects intermixed with the CGI.
Yeah.
And it happens at night, so the darkness helps kind of obscure the more computery looking effect of it. But, like, seeing him crawl up that wall and the camera, like, following him as he, like, climbs and swings and stuff, it's so cool. It's just, like, it's iconic. Like, he's like, oh, that's Spider-Man.
Even though the CGI itself is dated, I think these movies do a lot of interesting stuff with the action itself. And not just in combat, I mean, just, like, in general, the way these characters move and, like, interact with the world around them, even though you can definitely tell, yeah, this is computer generated and everything, it doesn't look that real. Like, there's very, like, interesting choreography of how all of the action is, like, portrayed.
Yeah, you can tell that the action scenes have a lot of thought put in them because they had to, because they were doing techniques that were never done before.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to take CGI and action for granted now in these movies, but, like, back in the early 2000s, like, they really had to be on their ball. And it's not 100% CGI all the time. There's a lot of shots of actual stuntmen swinging through actual cityscapes. Like, when you see POV shots of, like, Spider-Man swinging, like, his sort of point of view as, like, the camera swoops, like, that's an actual camera in New York City swooping through those buildings. Like, that sort of level of detail and planning and logistics and technicality all blend together to make the image and the action more impactful than some other superhero movies.
And then you have Mary Jane holding onto a Spider-Man mannequin while her hair is blowing in the wrong direction as it swings through the city.
That's the most inexplicable shot in, like, in all of the trilogy. It's like all this ingenuity and craft that you're putting into this, and that's what you go for.
It was so funny. It's only like a half second. You blink and you miss it, but it's so funny.
His first swing, it's sloppy. He's not quite there yet. But it's like, it's thrilling because he's landing on real cars and real stuntmen are doing real flips and dodges and real cars are hitting real things. And there's a tangibility to the action that isn't there with a lot of later superhero movies because so much of it is CGI. And a lot of it is good CGI. Don't get me wrong. But when everything is CGI, the characters, the backgrounds, everything, it starts to feel kind of floaty and kind of intangible.
It's like, why didn't we just make this an animated movie?
Yeah. So when there's a mix of elements, it makes it just more acceptable to the eye.
This is also the Green Goblin's origin story, like Tyler mentioned earlier. Willem Dafoe portrays the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, which is such good casting.
Perfect casting, really.
He's so fucking maniacal and over the top, like insane in this movie. Norman's just this billionaire, this poor, down on his luck billionaire whose company's getting taken away from him, and he decides to take this experimental formula which makes him super strong and super smart, but also turns him into the freaking, like, maniac who goes out and tries to kill everybody. Basically establishes a second personality in his head who's just a maniacal monster. And he and Spider-Man just kind of duke it out a few times. They have their one big fight at like the parade where Green Goblin shows up and kills like the entire board of like his company that like voted him out. And it's got a hilarious shot of like him throwing a bomb at them and them just exploding into skeletons. Like really, really obvious CGI skeletons.
It's like, why was that developed? Why is that a weapon?
Yeah.
Why didn't it disintegrate MJ and Harry, who are like right there off to the side?
Exactly.
But who cares? It's comics.
You get that fight, you get them fighting in like a burning building, which is a really clever sort of place for them, because Spider-Man comes in to like save civilians and everything, and then Green Goblin like hides amongst the burning building that I think it's implied that he set it on fire, and then fights Spider-Man in the burning building, which establishes later that like he notices who Spider-Man is due to the injury that he gave him during that fight. There's a real feeling of both, hey, we want to have a bunch of action scenes where these characters are fighting each other, but also each fight drives the plot forward. It's not just random fights. Like, the first fight establishes, okay, here's an actual villain for Spider-Man to start fighting. Like, he's been, like, beating up petty thugs all this time, but now suddenly he's actually going to deal with a real threat. Second fight is not even really a fight. Green Goblin shows up to, like, the Daily Bugle and demands, oh, we got to talk about JJ.
Good old JJJ.
JJJ. The Daily Bugle demands to know where the pictures of Spider-Man comes from. JJJ won't tell him, and Spider-Man shows up to save him, and then they have like a talk on a rooftop about, join me, Spider-Man, and together we can rule this city, or you can die a hero. But like, each fight and each encounter these characters have together establishes more and more of their dynamic. You really see how the difference in their backgrounds influence the way that they use power. Because Peter comes from like a low, down on his luck, running working class home where Uncle Ben and Aunt May, they don't have much. They're trying to get by, but they instill good morals into Peter. They really show him like, hey, you need to do your best with what you've got, work hard, do good to others, use the power that you have responsibly. Whereas Norman Osborn is this just like entitled rich man who has gotten everything his way his whole life and is used to demanding more from everyone around him, including his own family. And when he suddenly is faced with like the possibility of losing that, instead of like dealing with it responsibly, he just goes full on like, I'm going to kill everyone who's ever inconvenienced me, and just go on this murder spree. So like, you get to see the difference in their ideologies clashing each time in different ways, and also their secret identities allow them to have a different dynamic as Peter and Norman than they do as Spider-Man and Green Goblin. Secret identities in these superhero films, I don't feel like are used to as much effect as they are in this trilogy. I feel like this trilogy in particular uses the secret identity to the most effect. Like, it drives every element of these characters' interactions, the fact that they don't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Yeah, and that just goes back to Sam Raimi, like, really trying his best to, like, recapture, like, what he felt reading those early comics, because secret identities have kind of been thrown out mostly for more modern superhero movies.
Mm-hmm.
I think mostly out of convenience, and it works for the most part. Like, I'm not complaining about that, but like,
not every superhero needs one.
Not every superhero needs one, but like, when I think of like secret identities, like, and like it being like a major part of the character, like, it's not Superman I think of first. It's not even Batman I think of first, even though it's just as important for Batman. It's Spider-Man I think of first.
Yeah.
It's because of that 90s animated show and this movie being what they were. And then when I finally picked up the comics later, I'm just like, yeah, like that's it. That's there. Like, the secret identity is like the cause of so much of his problems.
It's also so much tied into like the difference at the way people see Peter Parker versus how they see Spider-Man. Because like Spider-Man, aside from like some people who treat him as a menace, like J. Jonah Jameson, like is very much beloved by the community. Like he does have haters and everything, but he is at the very least admired for like his strength and his ability to protect people. He's like a figure of respect within the community of New York. Peter Parker is the bottom of the barrel social outcast, where it's like, here's a loser nerd who doesn't have the guts to talk to the girl he likes, who's just going to be a pushover his whole life. Seeing the way that like the difference in these two personas and the way that people treat these two personas, but also treat the same person. Like, that's what's interesting about Spider-Man, because you'll have characters that love Spider-Man but hate Peter, or that love Peter but hate Spider-Man.
Yeah. That becomes really prominent in the second one, as far as, a win for Spider-Man is a loss for Peter.
Yeah.
And the second one really drives that one home.
Yeah.
I love, and I mentioned this when we were watching it, I love how so much of the action is based around traditional standard superheroics of a superhero saving people.
Yes, absolutely.
As great as a lot of these later superhero movies are, like, it seems like the whole, heroic aspect, like saving the world, saving people, is just kind of the periphery, just kind of the side effect, because the narratives are always often so focused on the internal struggle between the characters and the villain. Yeah. And which, of course, you need that, of course. But it seems like the wider scope of, like, these are heroes.
Yeah.
Like, is kind of lost with that, hyper focus on the interpersonal.
It doesn't always have to be a fight, Like, a lot of modern superheroes movies, like, the only way that we really see these superheroes do any sort of action is either when they're A, learning how to use their powers in an origin story, or B, fighting with the bad guy. In these Spider-Man movies, a lot of the action isn't about that. Like I said earlier, like, there's scenes of him saving people from a burning building. There's scenes of him, like, catching people falling off of bridges. There's scenes of him doing all kinds of things to save people.
A robbery, saving a couple from a convenience store from another robbery. Just simple superheroic stuff that connects him to the world that he's in and fleshes out, the story.
And shows why the community likes Spider-Man. That's a big thing that I think we lose a lot in, like, these, specifically with, like, the MCU and everything. Like, you don't see, like, Captain America or Iron Man really spending much time
with the people.
With the people. But Spider-Man is down on the ground with the people, helping them out, protecting them, doing, like, all of the things he can to keep people safe. And if that involves fighting a supervillain, great. But a lot of the times that involves him taking on petty robbers or, stopping a speeding car, things like that. And I think that's what's really great about these movies, and what endears us to Spider-Man as a character is that, like, he's a hero, not just in the sense that, we want him to win, but in, like, he's doing everything he can with the power he's got. With great power comes great responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And it goes back to what I was saying during the intro about the personality these movies have. Like, I love the montage when Spider-Man, like, in full costume is hitting the scene, and we just have clips of New Yorkers, like, man on the street reactions.
Yeah.
Of, like, a guy with 8 hands sounds hot. And, like, I saw him building a nest in Lincoln Center Fountain. Or, he stinks, and I don't like him. Like there's so much fun little personality, like, that just fleshes out the world in the movie and makes New York feel like a living, breathing place and not just a setting. Those little quirks and stuff.
You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us.
The guy in the subway singing his stupid song.
Yeah.
Dresses like a spider, he looks like a bug. We should all just give him one big hug.
Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
Like, that doesn't happen in these movies anymore. Like, these little quirky, memorable one-off characters.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's just fun to see. Like, especially not having seen these movies in so long.
Yeah.
Just how much vibrancy they have in the characters and the setting and stuff like that.
And I think we need to talk about J. Jonah Jameson, because first off, he's an amazing performance. Wonderfully done. Such a fun character.
Like, there's not a single person on this planet who doesn't think that J.K. Simmons as JJJ is like the most pitch perfect casting for any superhero character, every comic book character ever.
More than Hugh Jackman and Wolverine. Like,
yeah, more than the heroes.
Yeah.
In these movies, JCJ is like the top like casting with J.K. Simmons.
And part of it is just like the way he speaks, the way he acts, and all of like he's just so well fit to that character and bringing that character to life. But what I think also that we don't give enough credit to is that, like, J. Jonah Jameson is written in a way in these movies that makes him a clear antagonist to Spider-Man. He sees Spider-Man as a menace. He wants to basically run Spider-Man's name through the mud. But he's never evil. Like,
no.
J. Jonah Jameson in these movies, and in the comics, is never fully evil. He's a person with his own agenda and with his own ideology, but he doesn't do things out of sheer malice. And you see that in the first movie when, like, the Green Goblin shows up and demands to know, like, who's the one who brings in the photographs of Spider-Man. He could have just sold out Peter. We could have had a moment where, like,
this not even on the payroll.
Yeah. We could have had this moment where this shitty guy who's been giving our hero guff, you know, is revealed to be a coward. But he says, like, I don't know who he is. He sends it in through the mail. He lies to protect Peter.
Yeah, Peter was right in the room when Goblin busted in.
Yeah. Like,
and he still covered for him.
J. Jonah Jameson, I think, is perhaps the perfect sort of example of, like, giving characters who aren't central to the actual action of these stories, but are super important to this heart of the world of New York around Spider-Man. Like, J. Jonah Jameson exemplifies, like, you don't have to have a character who's super important to, like, defeating the villain or figuring out the villain's secret identity or any of that stuff. You can have a character has a decent amount of screen time and is, like, important to the other characters that is just a person in this world.
Yeah. And, like, that extends to the whole Daily Bugle office. All three movies, like, the Daily Bugle office and the characters they're just an added little extra dose of spice into the trilogy.
And you can take them out.
His lackeys. And,
you can take them.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you can take them out and you still get the plot. You get the premise of what's going on. They don't add an element that, like, makes it important to the plot to understand. But if you take them out, you lose the heart of what's going on. You lose the heart of, like, how Peter is struggling to deal with his, like, differing personas and how the public perceives him and Spider-Man. Yeah,
it's just another really well thought out aspect of the movies that could have been, you know, it can be easy to say, like, oh, that's superfluous. We don't need that, you know, or, you know, let's pare back some of this. But it shows that Sam Raimi and his team, like, really wanted to get at the heart of what makes the character and his world appealing in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, fans will tell you, like, it's not about the plot with Spider-Man. You know, it's about the characters. I think these movies understand that because all three of them have very simple stories.
And they're very character-driven.
I just wanted to get that quote in there. Hey, kiddo, let mom and dad talk for a minute, will you?
Itsy bitsy spider went up the water spouts. Down came the goblin and washed the spider. These are some of the most quotable superhero movies by far, too.
Deliciously quotable.
A lot of superhero movies don't give us, like, really obvious quotes to go back to. Like, these movies, like, you can quote a bunch of stuff from them.
Some people have a problem with Goblin's overall story. There is one common complaint about the movie that I share with other people, but this isn't one of them. A lot of people don't like how Goblin had a motive to kill his board of directors who cut him out. And he does that in the middle of the movie, and then his motive has to shift to trying to recruit Spider-Man in his goal of sowing chaos or kill him. I see where they're coming from with that, but I don't think it's a problem because I don't think the character needs a goal, a motive that has to extend to the finale.
I disagree with that on, like, a fundamental level anyway, because Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin, first off, Peter Parker and Spider-Man, even though they are perceived differently from the public, they are the same person. Like, Peter Parker puts on a show as Spider-Man, but he's still himself. Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin are like a fractured psyche. And it's interesting to see like what the dynamic between like Norman, who's supposedly still sane, and the Green Goblin, who's like this insane element of him, is. And I think what the Green Goblin really represents is Norman's desire to always be in control of everything. Norman wants to be in control, and then he has like the board of directors take that away from him. He has the government that was giving him a grant take that away from him. And when he gets the goblin formula in him, he decides he needs to kill these people. And when he's trying to kill the board of directors, Spider-Man suddenly comes into the picture and tries to stop him. And now we have another character who, even though he didn't wrong Norman Osborn personally, he's another element of the story that like keeps the Goblin from being in control. As long as there's a Spider-Man out there, like the Green Goblin is not in control of New York as he wants to be. I don't think it's so much like Norman Osborn himself has a reason to kill Spider-Man. I think it's the Goblin identity of wanting this power over everyone and everything, and knowing that Spider-Man will never bow to his will, that drives him to kill Peter, or want to kill Peter.
Right. And it's just such a comic booky thing, you know, the villain trying to recruit the hero. And just I just love the scene on the rooftop. It's so quirky. Like Spider-Man's waking up from being gassed, and Goblin's just there like, hey, like
he pats him on the head,
nonchalant with him, just smacks him on the head and just leans against the window or whatever. It's just like, you know, let's wrap it. But here's the real truth. And it's just it's so atypical of how you would expect these kind of things to go. It's not 100% comical. It's a little comical.
It goes back and forth between being like this sort of relaxed, sort of comical style, and then waxing philosophic about like the nature of man and everything. And that sort of dichotomy is exactly what supervillains are like in comics.
Mm-hmm. You just in a lesser movie or more straightforward movie, like that scene would be ultra serious, like, you know, we're not so different, you know, we want this, or we do this, or we think this way. Join me. Mm-hmm. Dun, 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 dun. But like, there's an element of that, but it's not quite like that just because of the way Goblin acts in the scene, you know, just like, because he's in complete control because, you know, Spider-Man's drugged. Mm-hmm. So, you know, he's going to act like a goofball, you know, and pretend that he's his friend for a bit. Think about it, hero. Hops on his tire and blasts away.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. Like, this movie really moves. Stuff is constantly happening, but it never really feels rushed.
A lot happens in this movie, but it always feels like it's explained to the extent it needs to be explained and explored. Like, it never feels like you're missing a part. Everything that goes down in this movie, as much as it is, which is a lot, Peter's origin story into Spider-Man happens in, like, the first act.
30 minutes,
yeah. The second act is him, like, discovering the Green Goblin, and then the third act is them confronting each other. There's a lot that happens in this film. We need to get towards the end of this one anyway, so we can move on to Spider-Man 2. I do want to say that I love the climax to this one, because it starts...
I agree.
It starts off with Goblin forcing Peter to choose between saving a group of innocent children or Mary Jane, which is a great sort of supervillain thing to do. Just like this, like, hey, superhero, now you have to choose between doing what's the socially right thing or saving someone you love. Have fun. And, of course...
And the woman you love, or suffer the little children.
It's great. I love how quotable this movie is. And, like, as like, tropey, like I said earlier, as tropey as it is, this movie loves these tropes, and it does them in a way that's so straightforward and honest that you can't help but get caught up in it. It's so emotionally engaging to watch Peter try and save MJ and these kids. Meanwhile, the Goblin's flying around beating the shit out of him because he doesn't have like a free hand to fight back with. And then like this whole bridge full of people overhead start like throwing shit down at the Green Goblin, and they say, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. And even though it's so corny and goofball-y, you kind of get wrapped up in the emotion of it. Like, you kind of get wrapped up in like, hell yeah! We're a city, we're a people, we're New York. I've never been there, but like, I'm there.
And like that wouldn't work if the movie hadn't gone out of its way to establish New York as a character beforehand.
Yeah.
It's a payoff for New York in and of itself as a character.
Mm-hmm.
And not to get heavy, but this came out less than a year after 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
They had to switch some of the scenes around in the movie that involved the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
So like this was just kind of like a scene of like, New York, this one's for you,
Yeah.
Here you go. And like, yeah, call it cheeseball all you want, but damn it,
it works.
If it doesn't bring a smile to your face.
It does. I get a little worked up every time I see it. I'm like, God damn it, they got me again, Spider-Man 1.
Yeah, like I think you dropped a couple tears. To be fair, you were a little drunk.
I was a bit buzzed at that point, but yeah, I got a little choked up at that point. And then after Spider-Man saves those people, he and Goblin go to finish it off in a super brutal fight. You wouldn't expect this level of brutality from like a Spider-Man film nowadays. Peter gets the shit kicked out of him. He gets thrown through buildings. It's like he gets a bomb blown up in his face. He gets pretty banged up in this fight with Gobby, and a lot of it's practical effects, which, like you said earlier,
yeah, it's all stuntmen and actors on a real set performing, these stunts, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about,
got weight.
Sometimes, yeah, like the tangibility and the weight, and like sometimes with all CGI scenes that you lose that.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2002, I took that scene for granted because superhero movies hadn't become all mostly CGI at that point.
Yeah.
So this was just like, oh, the cool beat 'em up scene at the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But in retrospect, it's even more impressive because it's not just with action. It's not just about looking cool. It's how it's framed, how it's lit, the sound design. The score drops out, and like it's just these two guys, and like you really hear the punches.
Every punch, every grunt, like
every punch is loud and sounds painful, and every grunt sounds like a real cry of pain. And there's blood and spittle and sweat, and it's pretty hardcore. Like, yeah. It's pretty brutal.
It ends with Spider-Man dodging. He finds out during the fight who the Green Goblin is, Norman Osborn, which throws him for a loop, and then Norman tries to kill him while he's off his guard, and ends up killing himself with his own glider by stabbing himself in the dick.
Even as a kid, I was like, why did they shoot it that low? Yeah. Like, why did they choose that area?
They didn't go for the gut shot, right in the crotch.
I don't think it's quite the dick. It's like right above. It's the pelvic mound area.
Yeah, the blades would have hit the sides anyway. It would have hit the whole pelvic mound. Yeah, it's not pretty. It's not a pretty sight, though. And then you have Goblin collapse after murdering himself.
Don't tell Harry.
Don't tell Harry.
Which is exactly how he goes out during the Death of Gwen Stacy arc in the comics. Impales himself on his own glider. The don't tell Harry thing is very important for the rest of the movies, which I wanted to yell at you in the sequels. Like, he said not to tell Harry. That's why Peter's being a stupid idiot about it. But that's a later discussion in a few minutes. I like the don't tell Harry line because even though Norman is a neglectful, emotionally abusive father to Harry, they have moments where they're vulnerable with each other. I mean, of course, it's for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm. They're codependent.
But the don't tell Harry line says, at least in his last breath, Norman was there. He at least didn't want his son to know that, hey, I'm the murdering villain called the Green Goblin.
He didn't want to see him at his absolute lowest, yeah.
He doesn't need to know that.
Which is such a good combination of both, like, his desire to protect his son from hurtful information and also his own ego. It's like, in his final moments, he's thinking, like, I don't want my image sullied in my final moments.
It's also, like, I just picked up on this rewatch. Don't tell Harry is a recurring line. Like, for some reason, like, these characters have, like, this thing where they don't want Harry to get the wrong impression or to be, like, judgmental.
Harry's an emotional man, baby, who can't handle any bad news.
Yeah, when Peter sees MJ coming out of the diner that she's working, she's kind of embarrassed, because she wants to be an actress and she hasn't made it yet. She's walking away, and he's like, don't tell Harry. And, okay, I won't tell Harry. Like, what is it with Nobody wanting to tell Harry the truth.
He's an emotional man baby who can't handle it.
Which, as shitty as Harry gets, like, I kind of see, I can understand his mindset a little bit in the sequels, because nobody tells him a fucking thing.
It's true. He's in the dark for so long.
He's just left in the dark by his father, by his ex, by his best friend.
Yeah. Everyone he trusted and cared about, he finds out has been lying or hiding things from him. I guess that kind of wraps up Spider-Man 1. I mean, there's a funeral scene at the end. MJ confesses that she actually loves Peter instead of Spider-Man, which throughout the movie you could see her falling in love with Spider-Man, but not Peter. And then there's some stuff when May's in the hospital where Peter says some really nice things to MJ that come off a bit cringy, but there's apparently enough to make her fall in love with him.
But make her realize her love with him.
Yeah, well, anyway, we'll get into the MJ Peter romance in the next couple movies. He turns her down because he's worried that she's going to get hurt if she knows he's Spider-Man, which we'll also get into in the next couple movies. And the movie kind of ends
with the final swing, known in the fandom as the final swing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the freaking suit. I just want to mention before we get into the sequels, the Raimi suit is iconic.
I love it.
It's just, it looks so good.
It does.
The color timing on the suits, the vibrancy of the red and the blue.
The way the webbing kind of stands up off of the suit.
The raised webbing that like can look silver or black depending on the way the light's hitting it.
Yeah.
Like it's just a good looking suit.
It is.
It's so cool.
It's
just so cool to look at.
I know a lot of people hate the Goblin suit in this one because it's not like comic accurate. But I kind of love the way that he's like an evil Power Ranger looking guy. I
don't hate it either. You know, like they were actually experimenting with like a fully articulated animatronic mask.
Yeah.
And you can see footage of it online if you look it up. It looks really fucking cool.
Yeah.
And for some reason they chose a static mask. And like, I honestly don't think it looks that bad. People really go hard on it. Like, it looks like a fucking Kmart costume. It's so cheap. And I'm like, I don't see it that way. It doesn't look that bad to me.
I like it. I think it conveys the whole like maniacal like monster sort of thing where he's like, it's got this big smiling goblin face that's like
this immovable smile.
Yeah,
like it kind of reflects the craziness of the goblin persona.
It's kind of goofy, but also kind of menacing. I like it.
Yeah, and I like how you can see Norman's mouth move underneath.
Yeah,
the goblin mouth. I think that's a cool touch. And the eyes are visors that can raise and lower. And he's fine looking. He's not the best designed villain of the trilogy. That would be Doc Ock. But he looks fine. He, doesn't bother me.
So that's Spider-Man 1.
That's Spider-Man 1.
We can
loved it again. Loved seeing it. It was like watching it for the first time again.
Yeah. It was a very fun experience going back and revisiting this one. A breath of fresh air in our modern superhero climate.
Yes, I agree. And a sentiment that I will carry over into Spider-Man 2.
And that kind of falters with me, but let's get into it.
Which puts you in the minority, my friend, because I don't know if you know.
I know that people love this one the most. They say this is considered the best Spider-Man movie, or some people the best comic book movie.
Spider-Man 2 has been considered, since it came out, one of the best, if not the best, superhero movie ever made.
I know.
And watching it again, I mean, I loved it. Of course, I loved it as a kid. And watching it again, loved it again. Fans think it's perfect. I wouldn't call it perfect, and there's obvious reasons why I don't. And there's obvious reasons why it's not perfect. I think this is going to sound precious, but I think it's perfectly imperfect.
Interesting.
What makes it work so good is that it takes everything that the first movie established and just goes all the way with it. It slows down. It really focuses on Peter Parker as a character and just it dissects him and what it means to be Spider-Man in a way that just really resonates. I find it to just be a really relatable human movie. Even though it kind of drops the ball with the whole MJ thing, I can't knock it too hard for that because I think everything else is so strong. I can make excuses for the love story, and I could look past it because there's only really one major aspect of the love story that I hate.
Mm.
All the rest, I don't mind. It's the ending, which we'll get to. If it wasn't for that moment in the ending, you know what I'm talking about. If they just handled it differently, I wouldn't have a problem at all. But anyway.
Let's get into Spider-Man 2. A real quick
Spider-Man 2.
recap. Peter's older. He's in college now. He's getting a degree in science. And he's having trouble balancing...
Science.
Yeah, he's having trouble balancing his life as Spider-Man and his life as Peter. This is definitely the moment where we see that the most, is like, everything that I do successfully as Spider-Man ends up making my life harder as Peter. If I want to save these people's lives, I have to, miss my pizza job. It's no longer pizza time. I got fired from pizza time. There's also a lot of memes in this one. There's a lot of memes in this whole damn trilogy.
He stole that guy's pizza!
And, he's getting sick of having to deal with being Spider-Man, and that manifests quite literally in this sort of, erectile dysfunction metaphor where he's gradually losing his spider powers because he doesn't want to be Spider-Man anymore, and for some reason his desire to not be Spider-Man is subconsciously causing him to lose his ability to be Spider-Man throughout the movie, until eventually halfway through the movie he gives up Spider-Man for a little while. But during all of this, he tries to get his life back in order, and he gets a chance to work under Dr. Otto Octavius, a brilliant scientist who's trying
Played by Alfred Molina.
Yeah, who is trying to create basically a miniature sun that would be able to power all of New York. And in order to control this miniature sun, he has to use these gigantic mechanical tentacles, which is of just the best, most comic booky way of having to deal with something like this. It's like, no, let's not put it in a sealed room or anything. We'll just do it in a warehouse. But I have these big tentacles, so that's fine.
And manipulate it with metal arms.
Yeah, that's fine. Obviously, the experiment goes wrong. The tentacles fuse to Dr. Otto Octavius, and he becomes Dr. Octopus, as the tentacles sort of gain a sentience of their own through their artificial intelligence and start to drive him mad in his goal to rebuild this experiment. The tentacles were specifically designed to see this experiment through, and even though he knows how dangerous and crazy it is to try it again, the tentacles start controlling his mind and making him want to do it. So he goes out and starts collecting the resources to do that through robbery and everything, and Spider and Doc Ock face off a few times, just like he did with Green Goblin in the first movie. And like Tyler said, a lot of this movie is also dedicated to more of the character moments with Peter, of being like, I'm sick of working for the Daily Bugle where I'm constantly getting shit on, and both as Spider-Man and as Peter Parker, because JJJ keeps telling lies about Spider-Man, but he's also paying Peter shit and not giving him a full-time position. He's sick of not being able to spend time with Mary Jane and his friend Harry, and all of the tension between all of them. He's just sick of it. There's things in this movie that I think are done very, very well, and there's things that I think this movie just fucking drops the ball on, and I think my biggest problem with this one and the third one is the romance. And the reason it doesn't bother me as much in the first movie is that the romance between Peter Parker and Mary Jane becomes gradually more important with each of these films. It becomes so much more central to the plot with each movie, and it's just not good. It's just, let's just get into the romance. I want to hear what you think about it first.
Get it out of the way. I see where both of them are coming from. As a kid, I didn't pay too much attention or cared to look into Mary Jane's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess that's main character bias, because it's a Peter Parker Spider-Man movie. I only care about how he feels and what he wants. And how could MJ be so callous and cruel and mean? And I don't think she's, and even huge fans of this series, kind of share that opinion that MJ's just fucking terrible. And I don't think she really is, because think about it, she confesses her love to Peter Parker. He denies her, but he's still pursuing her, and he's sending mixed signals, and she doesn't know how to take that. She wants him basically to shit or get off the pot. Even though there's that kind of shot where she at the end of the first movie where she touches her mouth, indicating that does she know he's Spider-Man? it's not confirmed if she completely figures it out or not. It's just like an inkling she has. She just kind of wants Peter to be honest with her. We should specify, we watched the 2.1 version of Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
Which I think has a very crucial scene of MJ that was deleted in the theatrical version, where she's talking, because she's on Broadway now, so she made it. She's successful. And she's talking to one of her friends as they're shopping, because we find out that she's dating John Jameson, JJJ's son.
J. Jonah Jameson Jr.
The astronaut! And she agrees to his proposal for marriage. But there's a scene that they cut out in the theatrical version that I think really did the character injustice, where she's talking about marrying John, and she wants to, but it's because she thinks she has to, because she thinks that's what's going to make her happy and what's expected of her. And then that goes back to her, abusive past in the first movie with her father. And it doesn't completely excuse her tone-deaf behavior. I don't know why Sam Raimi chose to do it the way he did at the end of this movie. But I can say that I see where she's coming from. Mm-hmm. And I don't think she's a terrible character like some do in the movie. I just think because the tone of these movies are so melodramatic that some of the deeper nuance between the relationship gets lost for the sake of upping the drama, when it could have just dialed it back a little bit to get just a little bit more grounded sort of interaction with them, is my take.
Okay. Here's my problem with the romance. Like you said, the tones of these movies very much is melodrama. It feels like a soap opera. And I feel like that works for Peter Parker's problems that he's dealing with, when he's dealing with, not having the rent, or having a shitty job, or, not being able to help out Aunt May, or having tension with Harry. I feel like it works there, because even though it can come off as over the top and cornbally, it still feels like there's a sense of sincerity here that, like, yeah, this is blown out of proportion for the sake of this film, but you can sense, like, the sort of emotional undercurrent going on, and you can still catch on to it. With the relationship between him and Mary Jane, I feel like there's a balancing act trying to happen here that only works with more subtlety, where they're trying to show this dynamic of, like, Peter has his reasons for not, revealing himself to Mary Jane, and also trying to maintain a relationship with her and everything. Peter has all of this stuff going on that makes his relationship with Mary Jane make sense. And Mary Jane has all these reasons for being mad at him, because of course he's not communicating clearly. He's sending her mixed signals and everything. And that works. But when you have it all under this element of, like, this melodramatic style, instead of it coming off as, like, this, like, nuanced dynamic of, like, we understand why each side is doing things the way they are, you have these two people just being terrible to each other. You have these two people just, like, being absolute asses to each other. Just Peter, keeping huge secrets and being a huge jerk to MJ, and then MJ being a huge jerk to J. Jonah Jameson Jr., and also, like, having these big melodramatic monologues towards Peter. It's like, I feel like the dynamic of their going of like, they want you to see both sides only works in a more subtle, nuanced story than it would in this melodrama. Because when you have it in this melodrama, you just have two people being assholes to each other, and for some reason they love each other for it.
Yeah, I think the main problem is I believe the love in the first movie. I think we needed a little bit more reestablishment for that in the second movie before all of their back and forth miscommunication happens. Usually I don't want movies to, like, hold my hand and, like, reestablish information that I should already have. But I think with this, it needed to show us again why they love each other. But it doesn't quite get there. It doesn't quite do that.
In the first movie, there's also very much seeing the love from Peter's perspective and his sort of, like, unrequited state, and having to, like, having Mary Jane slowly realize what kind of guy Peter was. In the next two movies, it's not about that at all. It's about them trying to make their relationship work, which is a different dynamic and an interesting one that I like to see explored, but they carry over this same melodrama sort of... How am I trying to explain this? When you have the beginning of a relationship in a movie, you can kind of go with this more melodramatic sort of style because there's this sort of like puppy love dynamic to it, where a relationship is just sort of starting out, where we kind of like want more of that over the top, grander than real life sort of feeling. When we get into like the nitty gritty, trying to maintain a relationship between two different people, instead of like trying to like establish a new relationship, you have to take a little more subtlety and nuance into it, because we're not looking at the big grand romantic gestures to make people fall in love with each other anymore. We're now looking at how two people who are committed to each other are trying to maintain a relationship. And I don't feel like these movies' tone works with that sort of relationship exploration.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't really disagree. Even though I think it plays a little better than you do for the most part. I hate that Sam Raimi chose to film MJ leaving the altar in like a victorious romantic manner.
Yeah, it's such a dick move.
That's what undermines my entire defense of this. Like, if they just had one little scene where like she lets down John as gently as she could, it's still a dick move. It's still because I feel like this movie wants to say it's like, hey, these characters are flawed and they're gonna make mistakes.
Yeah,
but like they play it off as this like a gag and like this grand romantic gesture. If there was just one scene where she's like, you know, John, like I think I've been lying to myself. Like you're a great guy, and I hate to do this, but like I don't think I can marry you.
And J. Jonah Jameson Jr. does nothing wrong throughout that entire movie. He is so loving and supportive, and like trying his best to make a relationship with MJ work. And she's
the movie is smart enough not to go down the cliche of like, oh, she got with a dickhead because, you know, her father was a dickhead and she's, you know, doesn't know what how a good man treats her.
Mm-hmm.
It's smart enough to avoid that, but it's not smart enough to respect the character of John, even though John's not in the movie much at all.
No, but every scene what
we get from him, he's a good guy. He's a nice, likable guy.
Yeah.
And if there was just that one moment where they interact, she breaks it off with him as easily as she can, I would accept her going to Peter in the end more than I do. The movie also has the smarts to know that it's not quite as romantic as we're led to believe, because he swings off heroically while she's watching him, but she has a smile on her face that slowly kind of fades.
Yeah.
Where she gets this look on her face like, is this going to work? Like, what's this going to be like for us? And I think that's a good touch. It was a smart thing to do to like, because, you know, there aren't any real happy endings for Spider-Man. You know, that's kind of like a thing with the character. I think that was smart to do, but it doesn't completely make up for, you know, just literally ditched him at the altar. He was there at the altar in front of hundreds of guests waiting for her to show up.
Yeah. Another problem I have with Mary Jane as a character is that she is such a damsel in distress.
It's
like okay. The trope of the damsel in distress. There are a lot of people nowadays who say that the damsel in distress trope in general is just sexist.
Inherently sexist.
I understand that. I think there's absolutely a way that you can have a romantic interest, male or female, be put into a situation where the hero has to save them that's not going to be inherently sexist like that. But this movie does not do anything to like dissuade people of that notion, because every movie MJ gets kidnapped, usually multiple times, and when she's kidnapped, she's just screaming her head off, flailing helplessly. Aunt May, the little old woman, does more to like protect herself in Spider-Man 2 than MJ does. MJ
tries. To be fair, she tries. She has a beam in her hand at the end of this movie where she tries to hit Ock with it, but he like knows that she's there and hits her away before she can do anything.
Like, there's just so little, and I don't need her to be like this kick-ass, badass butt kicker. Like, not every strong female character needs to be literally strong. I like what they did in the Spider-Man video game a lot. I didn't like it the first time around where she's constantly endangering herself. But I replayed
the PS4?
Yeah, the PS4 version. In that one, she's a reporter, and the reason her and Peter break up is because Peter's mad that, like, she keeps endangering herself, but she's mad that he won't let her, take a more active role in his life as Spider-Man. And the first time I played through that, I kind of was like against it because it's like, oh my god, MJ, you're totally recklessly endangering yourself. But like playing through it again, like I really appreciate that more because it's like, of course she would want to have a more active role in like helping Peter as Spider-Man, even if it's not a role where she's like helping fight or anything. Like, of course she would want to help because she cares about Peter. In these movies, she just doesn't do anything that makes it feel like she either A, wants to help, even when she doesn't know that Spider-Man and Peter Parker are the same person, she doesn't do anything, even though she's constantly kidnapped, that makes it feel like she's trying to, like, help Spider-Man with the situation or get herself out of danger. She's just this screaming, like, mess of a, like, hysterical mess in every time she's kidnapped. And it's just, it's so...
It's unfortunate, yeah. I can abide it in the second one because it has plot significance, because it's a catalyst for Peter getting his powers back and finally telling her that he loves her. I can deal with it in the second one. And because the movie overall, aside from their dynamic, I think is amazing. In the third one, it's fucking ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And I have positive thoughts of the third one more than I did before. So, but even though I was enjoying the third one a lot when we were watching it, when the time comes for her to be kidnapped, I'm just like, oh, time for the third act kidnapping. It's just like, oh, it's a Spider-Man movie. MJ's got to be kidnapped.
Yeah.
We've been talking about the flaws of the movie. Do you have anything more to say, or do you want to get to positives?
I do want to get into some positives. Let's talk about Doc Ock. I think I like Green Goblin better than Doc Ock in general, but there's certainly some elements of Doc Ock that I like a lot. First off, I think that he's a lot more interesting in his, not necessarily his design.
Oh. Okay.
No, not necessarily design, but in the way that his design allows him to interact with the world around him. The arms are so damn cool. And the scene,
they really are.
The scene where, like, he's unconscious in the hospital, and then the arms are, like, acting on their own and just kill a bunch of people in the hospital. Like, actually kill a bunch of doctors. Like, it immediately establishes how, like, dangerous and menacing this character is, even without Octavius being awake. That's such, like, a good setup of, like, just how much of a threat he's going to be. And I love the fights between him and Peter, because you have this guy who's just, like, a regular man without the arms, but the arms give him so much reach and like mobility that he's able to keep up with a superpowered being like Peter Parker. God, I love the train scene. Even without the scene where Peter's stopping the train, just like the fight on the train where they're like going over the cars and like jumping over bridges and like fighting on the side of the train. Like, there's so much dynamic action thanks to, like, the way that Doc Ock's arms allow him to, like, basically imitate Peter's wall crawling abilities, but in a way that lets him, like, feel completely different at the same time. While Peter is, like, sort of agilely moving around on buildings and the sides of surfaces and everything, Doc Ock is just, like, ripping out, like, walls and stuff, like, piercing into the walls with his arms, like, tearing shit up. Like, it's such, like, a good contrast and comparison between the two.
Yeah, Doc Ock is a fan favorite character because it's a fan favorite movie.
Mm-hmm.
He's just so good. Like, he looks fantastic. Those arms are a marvel of special effects. A lot of them are actually practical, like puppetry.
Yeah.
And the CGI for him holds up completely.
Oh yeah.
Like, there's not one shot in this movie where the arms look hokey. at all. The hospital scene, that's Sam Raimi getting back to his roots, because he made the Evil Dead trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And that scene, like, if that scene had a little bit more blood, like,
it would have been a horror.
That could be from an Evil Dead movie. Like, just the way he uses the camera, the way he uses snap zooms and quick cuts, and like emphasizes screams and the sounds of the arms without music. It's pure Sam Raimi madness, and it's awesome. And it's terrifying. It's so cool. There's even a fun little nod to Evil Dead where you see a character, like, his arm rises in the frame and he's got a chainsaw, and you hear the chainsaw rev up, and like that's pure Evil Dead right there. He's a sympathetic character. You don't want him to give into his hubris and to let the AI in the arms, control him, because he meets Peter, and he's a good guy. He's a good guy, and you know how these superhero movies are, like, they got to juxtapose the hero and the villain. Octavius is kind of what Peter could be, if he applied himself more, if he got his shit together more, if life didn't stop shitting on him,
mm-hmm.
like, Octavius could be, who Peter is. But because of hubris, a good man turns himself into a monster. It's another thing in Peter's life that's just causing him problems that he's got to stop. Every action scene with Doc Ock in this movie is chef's kiss. The action in this movie is perfect. Like, it holds up so good.
Even when the CGI is a little outdated, the actual choreography of the action of itself is so fun.
And when you pay attention to it, like, they really put a lot of thought into how these characters interact. Like, like, okay, this guy is a guy that has long mechanical arms. How would he fight with those? It's not just two characters punching and bashing each other for, a cool effect. There's thought put into the combat. Just being the two of them grapple on the side of a building and, like, smash each other into the sides of the buildings and through windows, and Doc Ock slings Spider-Man across the cityscape. And I mean, the train fight's a classic for a reason. Like,
it's one of the best action sequences put to, like, comic book film. Like,
it does everything right. It does everything right.
Here's what I will say, sort of against Doc Ock. I like Green Goblin better because he and Green Goblin have a very similar thing here, where they both have an experiment happen and they both sort of lose their sanity. With Green Goblin, it's very much this descent into madness that feels sort of right for Norman Osborn. Like, you have, like, a man who is clearly desiring power and control and everything lose his sanity to becoming a villain who gains power and control through murder and, sabotage and everything. With Doc Ock, it's really more of just seeing someone who wanted to do something important, then become obsessed with doing something important. And that's fine. That's a good character motive, I think. But the way that I don't feel that it's as well tied into Peter's story as I do Goblin's, because Goblin's story is running counter to Peter's, where you have two characters who are consumed with this notion of power. Peter in the sense that he needs to, like, use his power responsibly, and Goblin in that he needs to, like, gain as much power as possible. With Doc Ock, you have someone who's obsessed with doing some big, important, scientific breakthrough, and, like, becoming obsessed basically with his passion project. But that's not the story for Peter here. The story for Peter here is learning to let go of this sense of, I want to live my life without responsibility, having to deal with this struggle of, like, well, I'm not happy with this life of responsibility, and finally coming to terms with, it's not all about my happiness, it's about doing the right thing. I just don't feel like they connect as well as the story did with Goblin. And in the second act, Doc Ock kind of feels like something that sort of interrupts Peter's regular ongoing character crisis rather than contributes to it.
I can see that, but I'm utterly surprised that you have that take that they don't connect, because I think they connect far stronger than Goblin does with him in the first movie, on a thematic level at least, because it's the whole thing of how he helps him in the end. sometimes to do the right thing, and we have to be steady and give up what we want the most. It's what Peter wants is he wants a break. He wants a normal life. He wants things to go his way for once without this burden. But to do the right thing, he can't have that. Ock, he wants to complete his experiment. He wants to know that like it's gonna work, and that his life's work means something. So they're both on that dual, like, I want this outcome, and my actions aren't leading to that outcome, so I have to give up that desire for me to do the right thing. And for Peter, it's to embrace being Spider-Man again. And for Ock, it's to fight the control of the arms and destroy the experiment. Like, that's the whole point.
I guess so. It's just,
come on, you're the analysis guy.
No, I see
you should have
that.
picked up on this.
I see all that. It just doesn't click as much
It
as
doesn't click with you personally. Is what you're saying.
Like, no, it's the connection there is broader than in the first movie. In the first movie, there's very much this like connection between Goblin and Peter on the use of power. In this movie, it's more like the pursuit of desire and pleasure and like avoiding suffering. And that's what Peter's going for. But what Ock's going for is more like the pursuit of like achieving success. And even though they do have to both give up what they desire in the end, like what they desire is thematically different. Doc Ock desires like success and fame, and specifically is being driven to obsession over it through the arms. But Peter desires a calmer, more relaxed life. And I just don't feel that the two stories connect. Like I said, I feel like when Doc Ock shows up, it's disrupting Peter's character arc rather than contributing to it, because it's just pushing him further and further into the like, man, I don't want to do this Spider-Man thing anymore. This octopus guy's beating me up. It's not like I have to stop this octopus guy because he's what I could be if I also gave in to my obsession with being great, you know?
I mean, I guess that's a valid way to see it. I don't agree, but I guess you're entitled to your opinion.
My wrong opinion.
And lest we forget, Ock sees Spider-Man as
responsible for his wife's death. Yes.
Yeah. If Spider-Man didn't step in, everybody would have died, and if Spider-Man wouldn't have the problem of Doc Ock later on. So that just ties into the everything Spider-Man does just ends up going to shit later, no matter his best intentions.
There's also a small piece, and this is a very small gripe. There's a small piece of me that misses the very silly Goblin suit sort of villain look, because the Goblin suit is silly, like we talked about, but it's silly and menacing. Whereas Doc Ock in this movie just looks menacing. He wears like a Matrix coat and glasses the whole time. He looks very serious with these big, dangerous mechanical arms. There's no real goofiness to his design or anything that like sort of was there with the Goblin, and like that's fine. I'm glad they went with that character design. It matches his arc and everything, but like there's a part of me that's like, man, why couldn't we get that like green and yellow jumpsuit that he wears in the comics, where he's just like a sort of chubby guy who like floats around on these big arms and everything.
Yeah, like now that you mention it, is kind of funny that they went with a more muted look of a dark coat, and
He's much more serious, and like he's all in browns and blacks and everything, and it's just like
I wonder what the creative decision behind that means. I wonder if they wanted, because he's more of an introspective character and a more openly sympathetic character than Goblin. I wonder if they wanted the design of his costume to be more understated. And like not like when he's like talking to the arms and stuff like that, like and not have your eyes drawn to bright yellow and green.
Right. What I always liked about Doc Ock in the comics is that he's just this great big dork who's also got just these big dangerous machines strapped to him. He's like this pudgy, dorky looking dude, but with like a bowl cut, but like he's got 4 giant metal arms strapped to him. That makes him dangerous. Like it's that blend of goofy and dangerous and menacing that you only get in comic books.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's a small gripe. That's a small gripe. I like Doc. I don't want to make it sound like I don't like Doc Ock and I don't like his story here. I'm just saying I think I prefer Green Goblin because I feel like it ties in better with Peter's arc during that movie.
Man, all these interesting hot takes on Spider-Man 2 coming from Isaac.
Don't get me wrong, I love the action with Doc Ock here. It's phenomenal. The train scene, like I said, is some of the best action put into any comic book movie ever.
Let's talk about Peter and how, on a personal level, I relate to him so strongly in this movie, and I think why people relate to this movie so strongly, fans, and why they love it so much. I think what this movie does so well is it finds that balance between audience, like, saying, like, oh, man, I feel that, like, audience insert, but also making Peter his own character.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes with film and stuff like that, if, the filmmakers want the character to be relatable to the audience, they kind of just make him like an audience insert character with, not any real defining attributes.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the case with this. I forgot just how much life shits on Peter Parker in this movie.
Yeah.
Because Raimi's so good at his juggling of tone for the most part, the movie never feels too cruel or too dour, but goddamn, like, this guy cannot catch a break in any capacity.
Nope.
And mileage may vary, but like, none of it really feels contrived. It just feels like that's how it is, and that's how the story's being told right from the get-go. The opening scene of, like, the pizza delivery and stuff. He's late to his job because he was doing Spider-Man stuff. He's about to lose his job if he doesn't get there in time with the pizza. And even though he has to change into Spider-Man to make it, he still doesn't make it. Every Spider-Man scene in this movie, like, it's not superfluous. It all has a point and a consequence. He has tickets to MJ's show, says he's going to make it, but, there's some crime happening. He's got to be Spider-Man, and he saves the day, but it makes him late for the fucking show. Even little gags, like he can't get an hors d'oeuvre at the fucking party that he's taking photos of. Like, that's the worst night of his life. Like, he has a falling out with MJ. She gets engaged. Harry's drunk and calling him out and slapping him across the face. He leaves his lens on the camera, so he misses pictures. As a kid, I don't know why. I guess I was fucking stupid. But, like, I didn't quite catch on to, like, why he was losing his powers like he was. Like, yeah, I knew, like, oh, man, it's Peter Parker. He has bad luck. That's just how it is. And I guess it kind of sucks for him. But, like, I didn't realize just how much was piling up on him. And, like, Aunt May is getting foreclosed on. The Ock demonstration is a disaster. Just all of this shit that happens in, like, the first 30, 40 minutes of this movie. It's nothing but misery for Peter Parker. Like, nothing but misery. I love how him losing his powers is a mental thing.
Yeah.
Because as somebody who's gotten older and has dealt with, like, anxiety and depression and stuff like that, like, I haven't lost my mutant powers because I don't have mutant powers, but I kind of know how that feels like when you don't feel like yourself and you don't feel like you could do what you used to do, and, like, suddenly, like, things just aren't feeling like they did, and, like, your body's betraying you and you're not quite sure why. I feel that. I feel that for Peter because I feel that for me. It's so well done. It's such a relatable character in this movie, even over the first one, I think, because we've all had those moments, where we just feel like life's shitting on us for no reason and it won't stop. And, like, what do we do? Yeah. What do we do to make it stop? We become selfish. We try to change things to make our life better, even though it might not be the best thing to do. I love how the movie parallels two fire scenes with saving children from fires. In the first one, it's just, it's a villain thing. Like, he saves a child and then he learns that the villain set the fire and he fights the villain. As a hero, he can do that. But in this one, his powers are gone. He's been just being Peter Parker for a while. He's already, seen a mugging, walked past it, had a moment where he's like, should I? No, that's not me. I'm not doing that anymore. That's not my life. He walks by, he sees a fire, and he's like, because he's Peter Parker, and Peter Parker's a good dude at heart, he runs into the fire as Peter Parker to save a child's life. And it's this great moment for Peter, not for Spider-Man, for Peter Parker. Just another kick in the balls to this movie. He's sitting there getting oxygen because he's breathing in smoke, and he hears that there was somebody else in the building that he didn't know about that died. And it's just like, oh, God damn it. Like,
yeah.
Can he not do anything right? Can he not catch a break? And I mean, that's what he says. He's just, the scene following that, and he's like, am I not supposed to have what I want? What I need? Like, what do I do?
Right.
And it's just, there's this ache to this movie where you just want things to go right and for things to be better. And I think the movie focusing so much on just the character journey over propelling over a plot that just, goes from plot point to plot point to plot point. I think that's why people love the movie to this day and consider it one of the best, because it just has this protagonist that, like, even though Tobey Maguire can be a little goofy sometimes, you can't help but latch onto.
I agree with everything you just said.
Really?
Except...
Oh, no!
And
this
is going to go back to what we talked about earlier with the romance.
The fucking romance.
A big problem that I have with this, I agree that in all of the aspects where it's not related to the romance directly, yeah, this is a great movie exploring Peter's, like, tortured existence and having to deal with this very painful dichotomy between doing what's right and doing what makes him happy. But with the romance, which becomes a much bigger element of this movie and the third moving forward, it doesn't feel so much like, oh, poor Peter Parker. It's like, Peter Parker, you dumbass, what you doing here? Why you being a jerk to MJ? Why you not explaining things to MJ? Why are you doing all of this shit, Peter Parker? And the reason it comes off that way is twofold, which we already talked about, like why it's all of this melodrama and it doesn't work well for maintaining a relationship, but also the fact that the big reason that Peter Parker can't be with Mary Jane is because Mary Jane might get hurt if Peter Parker reveals to her that he's Spider-Man. And that's bullshit by these movies' own logic, because before she ever realized he was Spider-Man, she was kidnapped by the Green Goblin after being threatened by the Green Goblin at the parade, and when Doc Ock shows up, he kidnaps her not because she knows Spider-Man, but because she knows Peter Parker. He's not protecting her at any point with his secret identity, and nothing that happens to her in either of these films is because the bad guy knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of a weird little avenue for you to go down, because that's not really the point.
It's the core crux of his dynamic with MJ, is that he has to hide his secret identity, and this fundamental element of it is flawed because nothing that happens to MJ when she's constantly in danger is because she knows he's Spider-Man. She would be better at avoiding danger if she was aware she was trying to date a superhero.
I know, I see what you're saying, but I don't think that negates the reasoning for him wanting to keep his identity secret. I don't want to fall back but the comics, because I don't think that's a catch-all for any criticism. But that's how it is in the comics. His Aunt May's always in danger in the comics, even though she doesn't know. Mary Jane, Gwen Stacy, JJJ, Harry, his other friends, that's in the comics too. But that doesn't negate the reasoning behind him wanting to keep his identity secret. Even though they're still in danger anyway, his whole thing is if the cat's out of the bag, it's just going to get worse. What could happen if they really know? It's just an added layer of vulnerability and chance that he doesn't want.
And that's understandable for certain characters, but the entire problem that he has with MJ is a lack of communication and openness in their relationship. And when it's driven on this crux of he has to keep the secret, except the secret isn't doing him any good, and also the fact that we're topping all of this.
The movie knows the secret isn't doing him any good.
But it also tops it with this melodrama that makes their relationship just feel like two terrible people who are being terrible to each other. And I wouldn't have such a problem with this film if it wasn't so core to the actual story. If this were just a story about Peter Parker being shit down on his luck and deciding, I don't want to be Spider-Man anymore because I don't like being Spider-Man, it's ruining my life, this would be, I would agree, this is a phenomenal movie with almost no major flaws. But, like, the core crux of this movie is that one of the biggest reasons he doesn't want to be Spider-Man anymore is because he's sick of it ruining his relationship, specifically with Mary Jane. I can't put it into any more specific details than that. The romance kills it for me, and with each movie it becomes more central to the plot. If the romance itself, if there was just no romance story with Mary Jane, or if it was executed better, I would have no problem with these films, or at least very little problems with them. The third one has a whole host of other problems, but we'll get to that. But, like, it's the only thing keeping me from saying this is the greatest Spider-Man movie of all time, is just the fact that, like, this relationship between Peter and Mary Jane is so goddamn... It's not hokey and fun in the same way that everything else is. It's hokey in the way it's like, oh, you stupid motherfuckers, what are you doing? Just talk out your damn feelings.
I mean, I
know that's not how it works in real life. I know there's situations where people have all these stupid miscommunications, but that's also infuriating to see in real life.
I get that. I do. I really get that. And to a small extent, I agree. But them not communicating in the way that we feel that they should, that's just a hurdle of the melodrama that you either embrace or you don't.
I don't.
Like, I don't think the romance is supposed to be this realistic, quote unquote, like, I hate to say this, healthy dynamic in the real world sense.
But, like,
it's supposed to be this operatic, like, oh, they just can't pull it together, and they can't tell each other what they like. But on a logical real world communication, like, people just need to be healthy with how. Yeah, it doesn't work, but I think on a grander, fantastical scale, it's fine.
But
for the
also,
most part.
The problem is that I like this operatic, melodramatic style for almost every other element of the film. It makes the characters more endearing because they're all feeling larger than life. But then when you apply it to this element in particular of the story, it undercuts that endearing nature. It makes these people feel like assholes. It's like... The romance is so detrimental to every other element of the film. It's like
that's the thing, though. Peter being Spider-Man makes him into an asshole because of his stalwart dedication to and great power, great responsibility. Like, that's the thing. Like, that even fans. That's the thing that even fans gloss over. You pick up a comic book. And, like, Peter Parker is a good person, and he has a great heart, but as much good as Spider-Man does, it fucking makes Peter Parker into this flaky dick, even though he doesn't want to be.
Yeah,
like,
I guess
that's an aspect to the character that I think the movies mostly capture well, and why I think Spider-Man 3 is a better movie than I remember it being, at least in the editor's cut. Which is the one we saw. You
might have a point, but just like, even if I agreed with that on a logical level, the emotional response to it is just frustration. I see these elements of this movie, and even if that's something I can logically rationalize, like that's what they're going for, it's just so damn frustrating to see this element that makes all of these characters that... Yeah, I want to see their struggles, and yeah, I know they're flawed, but, like, seeing them be such dicks to each other is just not fun. It's just so damn frustrating.
I don't think they're actively dicks to each other until the third movie, and that's purposeful.
Oh, they're definitely dicks in the third movie. Are we not done with the second movie? Any less major thoughts?
Did we recap our feelings on the first one, or are we saving like recaps of all three until the end? I can't remember.
We can do a general recap at the end. I think we kind of did a short thing with the first one where we were like, yeah, we really loved it.
Yeah, okay. No, we'll save it all for later at the end.
Okay.
Because this one's going to go long.
It's going to be, we're already at 2 hours. We haven't even touched Nerd Ethics or Review or any of the other things, and we still haven't even got let's get into the third.
Well, I mean, I'm having a great
time. I am too. I'm loving this.
It's a school night, so.
It's a school night.
That means a lot.
I'm a big boy. Spider-Man 3.
Spider-Man 3 came out in 2007. Let me paint a picture. I am in the theater with my good lady wife, Erica, and some of our friends. This is how long we've been together. Isn't that sweet? Isn't that cute? I can't remember what movie we were watching, but I remember the teaser trailer for Spider-Man 3 coming on. Did not know it was happening. This was before the internet told you like what trailers were going to be in front of a movie a month beforehand.
Right. The
trailer starts and you're not quite sure what it is. It's like it's like a black background. It's kind of swooshing over this textured black background, and there's like vague texts, kind of like, oh, what is this? What's going on here? And it's like vague stuff like a hero, da 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 da. And I'm like, And then like the camera zooms out, and then you realize it's Spider-Man in the symbiote suit, the black suit, hanging upside down from a skyscraper, looking at his reflection in the window. Yeah. I lost my shit. Everybody I was with lost their shit. It's like, holy fuck, they're doing the symbiote suit.
Yeah. Which is unfortunately the weakest storyline in this.
I think the symbiote suit is a good storyline. I just don't think Venom is the best. And I will explain why later. So suffice it to say, I was more excited for Spider-Man 3 than Spider-Man 2. I mean, come on, Venom. They're going to do Venom, and Harry's becoming the new Goblin, and there's Sandman. Like, this can't go wrong. And then we're in the theater, and like, I am just getting secondhand embarrassment.
Yeah.
I'm just like, how is it this silly? How is it this messy? How is it this tone deaf? What is going on? I left it, and I'm just like, I don't think it was good. And I bought it on DVD because I wanted to convince myself that it was good, and I still didn't like it. And like I said in the beginning, like, it kind of killed my enthusiasm for the franchise, and then I just kind of moved on.
Yeah.
But, times change. And I just kept seeing, like, fans of these movies, they stuck around. They didn't go anywhere. They're still strong. New fans are happening like every day. Like, these movies touched people.
Yeah.
In important ways. Like, these movies mean something to people. And I kept seeing more and more appreciation for Spider-Man 3. And at first I just like dismissed it as like, oh, it's just because of the meme culture. It's just because of all the memes and like the Bully Parker thing that took over and just all the goofiness.
Gonna cry?
Gonna cry? Goblin Jr. gonna cry? This movie rivals the first one for quotes.
Oh, boy.
It's actually watching some video essays about like Spider-Man 3 is good, actually. I even watched this like half-hour like intellectual philosophical examination of hubris, chasing the dragon of Spider-Man 3. And I'm like, God damn, I guess I have to see this again just to see what it's like, because time heals all wounds, And I knew that there was a different cut of the movie called the editor's cut that reincorporated a few deleted scenes, removed a few scenes, rearranged the narrative a bit to make it flow a little better. I can't compare it to the theatrical version, but I just feel like watching the editor's cut, even though because trust me, like, I'm not going to gloss over the movie's flaws because it is the most openly flawed of the three. I think for the most part, it juggles all of the shit it tries to do fairly well for the most part. And the biggest compliment I can give it is that it's not afraid to make Peter a fucking dick, even before he gets the symbiote.
Yeah, it sure does that.
It's complete,
sure
and like
happens.
it's completely purposeful. And then Sam Raimi's own words, he wanted to tell a story where, you know, it challenges the audiences and the fans' perceptions that, you know, Spider-Man's this great do-gooder and like he's fallible and he's going to be prone to his ego, and he could be short-sighted and selfish. I think it does a good job of kind of deconstructing Peter in a way that makes sense. You know, before the symbiote, he's not an asshole in a way that's malicious. He's just, Spider-Man is embraced by the city like never before. They love him. Things are going good in his personal life. You know, he's doing good in college finally. His relationship with MJ is in a good place. After, you know, 2 movies of, you know, shit luck, and especially after the second movie, he's feeling good. You know, oh my God, everything's coming up Peter. And he can't get out of that headspace. He's so high on his own euphoria of things going well that he's kind of not hearing MJ like he should. He's kind of not hearing Harry like he should, because he's got all this adoration all of a sudden from the city. And excuse me, I've been talking so long, my voice is going dry. Even though he's not malicious, he's being short-sighted, he's being naive, he's being insensitive. You see all of this like negative energy kind of building up in him, like, oh, you know, you're kind of being a dick, like. And then the symbiote happens, and then it takes all of this bad stuff that he's been doing, not necessarily malicious, but just naively bad, and pushes it all to the forefront. What was once cringy with the whole emo Parker and the dancing thing, it's kind of just, it's how this Peter Parker would act, you know?
Yeah.
Like, this is exactly how this, and it's, even though it's goofy and like funny, like it's not presented in a way that's romanticized.
He's not supposed to be cool here. People are staring at him on the street like he's an idiot and a jackass.
Yeah. Like, you, the audience watching this movie, you're supposed to be like, oh God, what the fuck are you doing, Peter? Oh my, stop it. What is wrong with you? I think in a different movie, like exploring the hero's fall from grace, his dark side, it would kind of skirt the line of being like kind of too sympathetic to it, you know? Maybe romanticize it a little bit.
Yeah.
But this movie doesn't do that. It's just like, he's being a fucking asshole. He's being a dick. And you're supposed to think he's a dick. And he needs to knock it off.
I agree with you that he's being a dick in this movie. I'm not necessarily sure.
Here we go with the butt.
I'm not necessarily sure I agree that he's not a dick before he puts the symbiote on.
No, I said he was a dick before the symbiote,
yes,
but not
you
in
say,
like...
you say that it's not as malicious. I think it's a little more malicious than you do, because let's avoid the romance stuff for a little while, because I've harped on that a lot. Let's talk about his relationship with Harry. So by the end, I don't even know if we really touched on this. At the end of the second movie, Harry finds out that Spider-Man is Peter. Peter leaves without explaining what happened with his dad. He just leaves Harry knowing full well that, like,
because MJ
Harry
was in danger.
Yeah, he didn't bother to take the time to explain it at all, but he had to go save MJ. And he doesn't do anything in between these movies to really patch up his relationship with Harry. He just lets the fact that Harry thinks he murdered his dad hang in the air between them until it drives Harry to become the new Goblin and attack Peter. And Peter...
It's comic accurate. It's comic accurate.
Tyler, let me just throw this out here real quick. I do not give a fuck if it's comic accurate, if it sucks, okay? If it's comic accurate and it sucks, then the comic shouldn't have sucked in the first place. But anyway, Peter and Harry fight in the streets, and Peter fucking almost kills Harry. Like, this is pre-suit. He puts out a clothesline web for Harry to run into full speed, and Harry almost dies. And
yeah, well, you're missing context here. Harry was trying to kill him.
Yes.
And Peter had to stop him. So, to get Harry off his ass, he does the clothesline thing.
Which nearly kills him. He's moving at high speeds in an alleyway, and he almost like, Peter has been subduing people for years as Spider-Man at this point. He has years of experience being, like, really good at capturing people without hurting them or killing them. He could have found a better way to stop Harry from trying to kill him. He nearly kills Harry to the point where he gives him amnesia for the first half of this movie. That's not a small thing.
But I'm not saying it's a small thing, but he still cares. Once he realizes how hurt Harry is, he's there trying to give him CPR and trying to revive him and hoping he's not dead.
Yeah, I'm not saying that he doesn't care, but he basically almost murdered Harry. In a move that he knew would cause Harry a lot of damage. Like, there is no way he was sitting there with that clothesline web out and being like, this is just going to temporarily incapacitate him.
I mean, that's how you extrapolate how the scene went down. That's not what I extrapolate from it. He was in an alley. He's having bombs and razors thrown at him. He's fought a goblin before. He knows that there's nothing to fuck around with.
And he saw one kill himself. So he was either trying to, let Harry kill himself on his clothesline web, which would have been much more malicious. Like, it comes off as, like, a real dark moment that's a bit darker than I think it needed to be. Like, it's fine that we're seeing, like, Peter's descent into being more of a jerk and letting, like, his ego and id run wild. But, like, at this point early in the story, we're already kind of mad at Peter for not explaining to Harry what happened with his dad. Like, Harry's entirely justified for being pissed at Peter, and then Peter nearly kills him, and when Harry loses his memory, instead of taking that time to, like, explain their relationship and everything, he just kind of lets it slide and is like, hey, here's another clean break for me. I can just let Harry have amnesia and everything will work out in the end. It's like... that's a dick move. It's supposed to be a dick move. I know it's supposed to be a dick move, but it's too much of one, is what I'm saying. All of the work that went into make Peter an endearing character is undone in this movie in a way that doesn't, like, come back around, I feel like. Like, if this movie wanted to explore, like, how Peter Parker and Spider-Man can give in to their darker urges and then, like, have it become something where we sort of bring it back around in the end. But this movie doesn't ever come back around in the end. Peter is just a dick to everybody until he takes off the black suit, and then he's still just kind of less of a dick. He never really comes full circle into being a good person again.
I guess it depends on how you see it.
Because sticking to Harry, he does the same damn thing that he did in Spider-Man 2, where he's like, hey, we need to go save MJ. It's more important that we save MJ right now than we do patch up our own relationship. I'm not going to take any time to explain what happened with your father. I'm just going to say we need to go save MJ. And, I get that, like, the
You're
narrative...
missing the part where he tries to talk to Harry outside of the play. He tries to reason with Harry outside of the play, and Harry wasn't having it. And sadly, and this is the fault of the fucking whoever made the decision with what scenes were going to be cut, there was a scene where Peter goes to Oscorp to try to talk to Harry again, but that scene is nowhere to be found in any of the physical material on Blu-ray or DVD or anything like that. So... props for the movie trying to, even though we don't have that in the movie.
You're more forgiving than I am for things that a movie could have in it.
I'm not trying to use that as like no, it's not bad because of this scene that we've never seen before. I'm just saying, like, the studio screwed the movie over far more than we even originally thought.
It's also really funny, this dynamic that we have right now, because, like, 4 out of 5 times I'm the one who really likes something and you're the one kind of poo-pooing on it if we are disagreeing over it. So for me to be the poo-pooer and do you be really into it is an interesting backwards from our usual dynamic.
Yeah, I would say so. Dude, this is going to be our biggest hit yet.
Yeah, the 3-hour, 3-movie topic.
Because Spider-Man hype was through the roof because of No Way Home. Raimi nostalgia is at an all-time high. Like, this is going to be our big... We're going to get 40 views on this.
We're going to get 4 views on this. Maybe a lot.
So it's not just me simping for a very flawed movie and excusing excusing it. I do have many problems with it.
Let's get into some positives. I want to talk some positives first. I'm sorry to cut you off there, but like I do want to talk about some of the things I like about this movie. Before we talk more shit on it. Let's talk about Sandman.
Yeah, I think Sandman, he's a good character. Like, back in 2007, I thought he was just kind of a waste, but like, I think they do a lot with him with the little amount of screen time that he has.
Yeah. Every scene he is in paints him as probably the most sympathetic of the villains in this trilogy. He's got the whole angle that's kind of tropey now, but like we talked about, it's not that this movie subverts trope, it's that these movies like show their love of tropes, where he's got a sick child and he's doing what he does in order to support her because he's a thief and he steals in order to pay for his child's medicine. This could be just so cliche and boring, but like every scene that he's in shows this struggle of him knowing that what he's doing is wrong, but feeling like he has to do it anyway to help his daughter. Every single scene conveys that emotion because he's never like openly malicious, like wanting to hurt people or anything. He's always wanting to like get money in a way that doesn't hurt anybody. When we get the flashbacks to his interactions with Uncle Ben, you get the feeling that like he wasn't trying to hurt Uncle Ben. He just wanted to get the car from him. The scene where he first turns into Sandman, the first thing he does is reach for the locket with his daughter in it. Every scene is tied. It's such a powerful scene because he's barely able to materialize, and yet he's just reaching out for his daughter. Everything that is in this movie shows his connection to his daughter. It paints him so sympathetically and well, because you understand why Peter hates him, because, you know, he was responsible for Uncle Ben's death, but you also understand, like, why Sandman is doing what he does, and the guilt he feels for having ever been responsible for hurting somebody.
Yeah. He's a character worth looking at again for people who aren't a fan of this movie, especially if you can track down the editor's cut. That Birth of Sandman scene, it's a completely CGI scene, but it's like it's one of the most beautifully emotional scenes in the entire trilogy without a word of dialogue.
Yeah.
Just the score is beautiful, and it's just this guy just literally trying to pull himself together again. He crumbles a bit, and then he's trying again, and just the part you mentioned where he's reaching for the locket, like he sees it and he's like, "Oh, my locket." Well, he doesn't say it, but like that's the look on his sand face. And just it's such this little heart-wrenching moment where like he's not fully formed and strong enough, and like his little sand mitten hand crumbles around the locket and he can't grab it yet, like symbolizing like the relationship between him and his daughter right there in that one image. He wants to be there, he wants to be close to her, he wants to have her in his life, but he can't reach out and grab her.
Yeah.
Like it's this like deeply moving, artful moment in this like somewhat of a mess of a movie, and it's so good.
It is.
It's so good. And the effects are great. They hold up. Frick. How old is this movie now? It came out in 2007. 14 years old. And again, the action in this movie is as good as Spider-Man 2, I think. All the action holds up incredibly well.
I would say that the finale is a little more of a mess just because there's so much going on between the fight between Sandman and Green Goblin and Peter and Venom. It gets a little messier there just because there's so much. I feel like it becomes a little more chaotic there towards the end, and not in like a fun way, more like a what the hell's going on kind of way.
Interesting. I don't feel that at all.
I'm glad that you found like a new love for these movies. I've certainly found a new love for the first one at least, and I'm glad to have latched back onto that.
The deleted scene that they put back into the editor's cut with Sandman.
Oh, yeah.
Why the heck? Like, you watch these movies that are like alternate cuts or director's cuts, and you think, what were they thinking? It's such a simple scene. It's not a long scene. And it does so much to like tie up his motivation and his character. Like, this happens after Spider-Man murders him or thinks he murders him. His wife and his daughters, they're just at a park, and like she sees a sandcastle, this beautiful sandcastle. And you already know like that's him. And like she just goes up to the sandcastle, and like handprints form in the sandcastle, and she's touching the handprints, and she puts her ear up to it, and like the implication is that like he's talking to her, but you don't hear what he's saying, and it's just this beautiful little moment that like reinforces like why he's in this story and doing what he's doing.
Yeah,
there's little moments like that make the movie a little better. There's also more with the black suit tempting Peter. In the theatrical version, from what I remember, like the symbiote latches onto him and it's just kind of there, and we don't really get the sense of exactly what it's doing to him. What's added in this version, and it's not a lot, but it goes a long way, is like we're constantly getting like shots of him looking at the trunk where the suit is, like calling to him, pulling to him, like an addiction or something like that, or just something he can't stay away from.
Yeah.
He's sitting in his apartment just kind of like not knowing what to do, and like the suit's just there and he keeps looking at it, and there's one shot where he opens it up and the suit's breathing, which is actually really creepy.
Yeah.
And just these little moments added into the movie that weren't there before, of just like him and the connection to the suit, emphasize, that like this is a problem. This is really fucking with his head. This is bringing out the worst in him in a way that the theatrical cut didn't quite get across as well as it should have. The infamous dancing scene. the infamous dancing scene, forever memed, in my opinion, plays better in this version than the theatrical version, because I believe in the theatrical cut, the dancing scene happens after he disgraces Brock and outs him as a fraud.
Yeah.
And that's when the strut happens. But in this one, it's like really darkly sinister.
Yes, because it's right after he almost kills Harry again.
It happens after he thinks he killed Harry. Harry and him have that brutal smackdown in Harry's apartment. And then after he blows up Harry's face, it then cuts to the strut. And it's like, oh, Jesus, he's so far gone. Oh, he's such a fucking asshole now. He's such a villain. Like, it plays better. Like,
I don't know if it plays better. It certainly has a stronger emotional reaction. I certainly remember sitting there and being like, what the fuck, Peter?
Like, I mean, the tone of the scene isn't, like, the style of the scene isn't different. It's still him goofily strutting down the street and, like, dancing and shit. But it has this air of crazy, darkly sinisterness because of what it's following. And so that's why I think it plays better, is because it has a stronger thematic purpose than just like, oh, I just embarrassed my colleague strutting down the street.
I think the big difference between me and you with these movies, and the reason that you like the second two more than I do, is that you are very into this idea of exploring sort of like the darker elements of Peter's story, like both in the fact that he has to suffer to be Spider-Man, and also in the fact that like he will eventually give into his darker impulses and, do some real nasty shit. I think you like that exploration, and I like the concept of it, but there's something about it I don't know. What I really liked about the first one is that even though it showed like Peter suffering and everything in the first one, it was still very much a message of hopefulness and doing the right thing. And these next two movies just kind of seem to undercut that theme. Like the second one is giving up any sense of happiness in order to do what's right, and that's kind of depressing as hell. And then the third movie is like, here's a superhero being a dick, and like that's kind of depressing as hell. Like that hopefulness in the first one of like that moment where everyone sort of like comes together and fights against Goblin, like that's not present in these next two movies. There is a scene in the second one where everybody on the train is like, we won't tell anyone, and that scene's kind of moving, but like the overall vibe of it is like Peter just has to deal with the suffering of being Spider-Man. There's not like this moment where it's like,
I don't think Spider-Man 2 has a message of he just has to deal with the suffering. I think it's he needs to find acceptance and equilibrium with Spider-Man and Peter Parker, because the kind of the point of Spider-Man 2 is that like his life wouldn't really be that much better if he wasn't Spider-Man. Like that's what the movie shows you. it's still going to be a crap show.
Yeah,
it's
he has to put up with the suffering either way.
It's about how he deals with it and the balance that he chooses. I see where you're coming from. I do. I think all three of them are hopeful in different ways, and of course, your mileage may vary on execution. Obviously, it goes back to how these movies can be surprisingly understated when they need to be.
Well, that's my problem is that I don't feel like they're that understated. I feel like it's more like...
Well, let me explain.
It's a melodrama in the next two. In the next two, it feels like we're doing melodrama for the sake of melodrama, whereas the first one, it felt more like we're doing melodrama for the sake of contributing to this, like, comic style that we're going for.
Well, let me explain. And so you can further rebuke my point. It's all open to interpretation. Of course, that's the motto I live by. Like, movies are only as good as how they make you feel and what they make you feel. I like how the third one ends with, let me kind of just blast through some recap. Editor's cut Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man comes to Harry for help. Harry, she needs his buddy. Like, come on, let's do this. Harry's like, no, get away from me. He looks at a photo of the three of them with tears in his eyes, and then it cuts back to the battle. And then, like, when all hope is lost, when Spider-Man's about to get his shit pounded into mush by a giant Sandman, Harry shows up. They team up. They kind of reconcile, and full circle. I love full circle. Norman Osborn dies from his selfishness and evil by impaling himself on his own glider. Harry chooses love. Harry chooses selflessness, protecting Peter from venom, and is impaled on his own glider. They forgive each other on Harry's deathbed, or death building, because he's just in a construction site. Sandman and Peter forgive each other. And I like how there's not this, like, long, drawn-out scene of, like, MJ and Peter, like, explaining themselves to each other and apologizing at the end. And before you interrupt, I totally get if, like, you needed that for it to sink home or something like that. But I like how it ends with just, it's no dialogue. MJ's back singing in a club. Peter walks in. They just look at each other. Peter extends his hand for a dance, and she accepts, and they embrace. And it's just saying, like, okay, they're gonna try to make it work. They're gonna try and forgive each other and keep going. And I think it's kind of a beautiful moment. Like, I could totally see if that doesn't play that way for you, or if it's not enough for you, but it works for me.
I am happy that you got something out of it. I'm not gonna harp on the MJ romance again. I already stated basically everything. I think it's at its worst here. Where this is so much Peter being a dick, this is the movie where it's like his relationship with MJ. These two are never happy together. You know, that's my biggest problem with these movies.
Yeah.
They're never
I can agree.
happy.
We don't get enough of them being happy together. I agree.
There's no reason for these two to be in love. There's never a scene where they're just happy together. There's a few moments in the first one.
In the beginning, in the web.
Yes, when he's trying to, like, establish in the first movie, there's, like, that thing. The third, don't give me that half a minute bit in the web where they're just kind of, like, sitting together.
It's not half a minute. It does its job.
It does nothing. He's
happy to be there watching her in the play. She's happy to have him there in the front row. They're being romantic in the web, being in love, and then Deus Ex Machina symbiote comes out of nowhere. Aliens in the movie for no reason to fuck it all up later.
It's not enough.
If that's fine if you think it's not enough. I would have liked a bit more myself. I'm not gonna lie. But it is there. It is there if you look for it.
So much in the third movie relies on them not fucking talking to each other again, even though now we've actually established that she knows he's Spider-Man.
MJ does much better at communicating with him than he does her.
Tyler,
she does. She's like
a scene where she is threatened by Harry to break up with Peter. And she, instead of saying, hey, Harry remembers that he's the Green Goblin, that you killed his dad, you've got to save me, Peter, she goes through with it because she's worried
Harry was right there watching the whole time.
He was.
He could have said, "Hey, I'm listening. I have goblin hearing. Like, if you sell me out, I'm gonna blow you up with a pumpkin bomb." Like,
she could have called Peter later at any point. She could have done anything to convey this. It was such a trite narrative for the sake of having tension narrative moment. It's like, we have to have them break up because we want. It couldn't be because Peter's being a dick. It was, oh no, we have to have Harry Osborn threaten to kill Peter Parker in order to have this breakup. It's not that Peter's being a jackass this whole movie. No, let's just add some more miscommunication bullshit in again, even though we did that whole angle in the second movie. It's just so goddamn frustrating that this is the angle that they're going with.
There definitely are frustrating trite plot contrivances in the movie. I will not lie.
The whole damn thing's a plot contrivance. Like, the whole damn movie, start to finish.
There are a many. Yes, there are a many.
It starts with a damn
entertainment value goes a long way, sir.
It doesn't. It doesn't because it's not entertaining. It's frustrating.
It's frustrating and entertaining. It could be both at once.
Sure, if we're looking at it in the same way we look at, like, ironic enjoyment, I would say
they didn't want. Sam Raimi did not want to do Venom. Let that be clear.
I get that.
So
he still did it anyway. I'm not talking about the woulda, coulda, shoulda. I'm talking about the movie that is. I don't give a fuck about the movie that could have been.
Let me stand in solidarity with you, okay? It bothers the shit out of me that the symbiote conveniently falls out of the sky right next to them in the woods. Like, oh, this universe has aliens in it.
Suddenly.
That's so stupid. It would have been so much better if it came from a lab, like in the Ultimate Comics, or it's like man-made and it gets on him. There, problem solved. No stupid contrivance of it coming from space.
There's also just I like
the Harry getting amnesia is stupid as balls.
Yes.
Completely stupid as balls. It's amnesia is such a made fun of trope, and they did it in 2007, and it's silly as shit.
And as much as I like Sandman and his whole arc in this movie, the introduction of him is a contrivance because it's like, oh, the guy who killed your uncle wasn't really the guy who killed your uncle. Now here's a different guy who killed your uncle. It's just
that doesn't bother me really because
everything that comes up is just
in the movie.
Everything that comes up in this movie is just something that happens out of left field for the sake of making a thing happen. It's like things are just happening because we need a plot to go forward. It's not like this is the natural progression of how a story should go. It's just, oh, why would Peter hate Sandman? He killed his uncle. No, he didn't. Oh, yes, he did. We're going to retcon that element in the story. He's going to get the Venom suit. How is that going to happen? Meteor's going to get
Historically, the third movie in a trilogy,
Tyler,
has a secret twist, a revelation of something we thought was true, what wasn't true.
I care about the potential. I care about what
I'm not talking about potential. I'm talking about storytelling technique and trope. That's what I'm talking about.
And it fails on all fronts.
I don't think it fails on all fronts. I honestly do not mind the Sandman actually killed Uncle Ben Ankle at all, because I think it leads to the more sincere moments.
I think it leads to it, but at this point in the movie, we've thrown like 3 other plot contrivances in, and I'm already detached.
And there are just too many characters. Like Gwen Stacy did not need to be in the movie.
Oh God, no.
Gwen Stacy did not mean that. But I do like Topher Grace as Eddie Brock. I like how just of an immoral
little shit he is.
Little shit weasel that he is. Like he's anti Peter Parker. He's Peter Parker, like shitty without the symbiote. Like, and I just love how weaselly he is. And it comes with another great quote: "See ya, chump." After he smashes his camera against the wall. What the hell? Oh God.
Anything else we need to say about Spider-Man 3?
We
could talk about it all day.
It's a rich tapestry of theme and character and revelation, and
it's a dirty blanket.
It's an entertaining, very flawed movie with its heart in the right place. It just It just drops a lot of plates along the way.
It's a deep vein for memes.
I can enjoy it mostly unironically because I think what it does right, it does enough right to make it palatable for me. So I don't think it's the dumpster fire that most once thought it was.
Okay. We've gone a long time on this, and I'm debating whether or not to even do nerd ethics or just jump into review.
Dude, nerd ethics. Come on. I was looking forward to nerd ethics for this one.
Okay, then let's do it. Let's do the big question. The obvious question, but the big one. With great power comes great responsibility. How much must a person, or should a person, sacrifice their personal happiness and the happiness of those close to them in order to benefit the greater whole?
And I was hoping that's kind of the thing you were going for, because that kind of ties into what you were saying about like why you think I like these movies and the angles that they explore. It's because I have a somewhat kind of atypical opinion on Spider-Man and Peter Parker as a character.
Okay.
Most fans, they kind of deify the with great power comes great responsibility and his dedication to that mantra and just like doing what he has to as Spider-Man no matter what the cost.
Yeah.
Me, on the other hand, I see it as this deep, deep character flaw in a way that Secret Identity isn't for most superheroes because of the way the character has always been portrayed and like the idea behind it. Does Uncle Ben really want Peter to lie to May his whole life? Would he really want Peter to lie to Mary Jane or his other love interests or his friends and his workplace? Is that the kind of great power and responsibility Ben is really getting at?
Or even ignoring the Secret Identity angle, does Ben want Peter to like give up all happiness and well-being, not only for himself but his loved ones? You know, Peter's a flake on Aunt May, he's a flake on Mary Jane, he's a flake on Harry. Uncle Ben seems very much to be a man who is dedicated to providing for his family and making sure that they can live comfortable lives, at least within their means. But like, Peter takes that to the extent of being like, I'm going to give up any and all happiness that I and the people around me can have in order to serve this greater idealistic good.
And there's a major aspect of he enjoys being Spider-Man a lot. That's something I think some people forget. Like,
yes.
as much as he laments, like, why was I cursed with this power? Like, he does that a lot, but he also loves it. He loves swinging through the city and feeling the wind in his face. He loves the freedom that it provides him as well.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, it's this single-minded, obsessive drive to this ideal. It makes him like, it takes a good man and kind of makes him an asshole in some respect where he can't get out of his own way.
Yeah.
And that's a controversial opinion among the fandom, let me tell you, because some writers kind of have that same opinion too. Like, Peter kind of needs to grow up, you know, like, let's have him grow up a little bit. But like, fans, anytime you change the status quo for Spider-Man, like, they revolt. If he's not perpetually broke, perpetually like having relationship problems, perpetually just like living in squalor, like, then it's not Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, like, the way the character was conceived and his world, like, it boxes him into a certain status quo that's more restrictive, I feel, than other superheroes. Every major superhero has a status quo.
Yeah.
All of them. But like, there's just something about the Spider-Man story that feels more restrictive to character growth and expansion and new ideas than other superheroes. Like, Ant-Man's always going to be the war on crime, like, kind of super peak human dedicated to, you know, blah, 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 blah. But you can do a lot more with that concept. Like, sometimes he's a swashbuckling, globe-trotting crime fighter. Sometimes he's mentally damaged and broken and half crazy. Sometimes he's perfectly well adjusted and, you know, chipper. Like, there's a lot you can do with the status quo of Batman. But like, if you make Peter financially stable for a while, then like, that's not Spider-Man. Spider-Man's supposed to be struggling with money all the time. or if his relationship is fine. Like, but Spider-Man is always having trouble maintaining his relationships, and I think, and I don't want to shit on the fandom because people love Spider-Man, and I love that people love Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man, but I don't think that they allow him to grow out of that status quo, and I think that is a detriment to the character in the long run. As much as I love Spider-Man, I'm reading a bunch of Spider-Man comics right now. Like, sometimes there comes a point where I'm like, God, Peter, just like fucking grow up, like figure this shit out. Yeah, like if you just did this or you just did that, things wouldn't be the way they are. Like, I don't know if I had it. I don't know if I had an ultimate point to that, but I guess what it was is that my view of Peter Parker as a character is a bit different than most people, in that the ultimate altruism people see isn't quite the altruism, in my opinion, that people think it is.
That's what I kind of want to challenge here, is this idea of altruism. This idea of altruism being this perfect thing, this idea of like, Peter is so selfless, he needs to be selfless. This is what he should do with his power. And his selflessness is a form of selfishness. Maintaining this code, following this code of like, I'm going to use my power to benefit the greater whole, is hurting people on the personal level, not just himself, but like other people around him. He's unreliable to people who rely on him. Aunt May is an older woman who can't really take care of herself in a lot of ways. And Peter, being this flake, like, puts a great deal of like stress and tension on her to like try and basically take care of a man-child in her eyes. Cause it's like, oh, my poor little Peter, he can't take care of himself. He's just so scatterbrained, and really he's out there being Spider-Man. But it's like, you're putting all this strain on a family member to pick up. It's sort of this question of how much value do we place on helping the greater whole versus helping the people who are directly important to us. Is heroism a good thing when you're helping strangers at the detriment of people who are directly important to you?
Yeah. There are so many comics just where MJ is perpetually pacing back and forth in their apartment, pulling her hair out, worrying, like smoking, like, is he going to come home? He's supposed to be here. Oh, where'd he go? Or we were supposed to do this, or we were supposed to do that. And like, it's just, it's this constant source of tension in their relationship. Mm-hmm. I'm just like, man, like, this isn't healthy. Like,
it's really not.
And they kind of tap dance around it by like having her be like, oh, but I know what I signed up for, and I love you, and I love that you are Spider-Man and that you take this burden upon yourself. That's fun and romantic, but like at the same time, it has this really unhealthy tone to it underneath the surface, which is why I think I'm more forgiving of the aspects of the sequels that you don't like, because like I kind of see them in that, like I'm like, oh, like these movies kind of know that this shit is fucked. Like, like there's a reason Spider-Man is considered the most relatable superhero, and I think he's also the most profitable as far as like merchandise and shit.
I think he's like I think he is.
He's the everyman for a reason, because anybody can kind of relate to like, oh man, like I wish I could just do this and be with my people and just do this and that, but I got this to do and this is always in the way. And it's a really good character dynamic and then psychology that Stanley and Ditko tapped into back in the 70s.
Yeah.
But with media analysis now being more focused on like comparing like emotion and how people interact and relationships and stuff like that to like the real world, like, hey, in reality, this isn't healthy. In reality, this is kind of shitty and toxic. And it's really interesting to like view that through Spider-Man, because my God, like so much of his problems are his own making.
Yeah.
Not all the time. Like there is the sort of like the universe is against Peter Parker thing, but like, even though the universe is against Peter Parker is also against Peter Parker.
Yeah. Want to do some review?
Yeah. If you don't have anything else to add.
I think we hit it pretty hard on the head. I don't think there was a solid answer to that question. I think it was just one to consider. Review. Let's start with the first movie. Rotten Tomatoes, it's got 90% on the thermometer, the tomato meter. Tomatometer, and 67% audience. So it's actually got a lower audience score than the critic score, which is interesting. Charles F. says, solidly decent. Willem Dafoe and James Franco are both unintentionally hilarious in their performances, and that they play them well enough to be taken seriously. 3.5 out of 5 stars. I don't know what that means, that they're unintentionally hilarious and play them well enough to be taken seriously.
I guess he means that, like, even though there are aspects of the performances that are unintentionally funny, like, they're good enough where you can take the characters seriously for the most part. Which, I mean, yeah, I kind of agree. Yeah, James Franco's a freaking doof in, like, all 3 of these movies.
You can tell he's having fun. James Franco's having a ball playing this.
He humiliated me by touching me.
This is from Raphael R. I can't deny that for me, Tobey Maguire was weird as Spider-Man. The actor is not quite good. He looks too old for the character's age. Almost everybody does, honestly. The only exception is James Franco. And his chemistry with Kirsten Dunst is divide by zero, non-existent. Despite being a virtuous character, I really could not sympathize with him as Peter Parker. 3.5 out of 5 stars.
I mean, yeah, I get it. Like, as much as people love this trilogy, there are the detractors that just can't get over Tobias Maguire being a freaking doof. With his big eyes and his goofy facial expressions, which are too much at times, but for the most part, I can't say that I hate his performance. I mean, he makes it work.
He makes for a good dork. And Peter Parker's a dork, so I like his performance for the most part. I think my problem is less with his acting and more with, like, the way that he's written at times. Let's get into Spider-Man 2. 93% tomatometer and 82% audience on Spider-Man 2. Robin H. says, the best Spider-Man movie of all time, and it's not even close. This is probably the most perfect depiction of the struggles of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. 5 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, that's pretty much the general consensus with fans.
Yeah, a lot of people love this one.
I don't want to play this is the perfect one, this is the perfect one, this is the best one. Having rediscovered them since my childhood, I love it. I think it's great. I think it can be considered among one of the more triumphant superhero movies ever made. But, I mean, my favorite is still going to be Into the Spider-Verse.
Just Into the Spider-Verse is a goddamn masterpiece on every level.
But Spider-Man 2 can be a good close second.
We need to do our Into the Spider-Verse review, because that's a damn good movie. Bus T says, Toby McTruckfuck is the best actor of all time. This movie from start to finish just slapped my hole a new asshole. J.K. Simmons carries the movie hard, but he still gets outshined by Tobey. Greatest storyline ever. Doc Ock has a huge cock. 5 out of 5 stars.
Man, I don't know how this review managed to say everything that I tried to say in this podcast so much better than I ever could.
We've been talking for 3 hours, and that Bus T got you. Oh, God.
Goddamn, Bus T, you are a paragon of just language.
Doing the work, doing the Lord's work on Rotten Tomatoes. Moving to Spider-Man 3, 63% tomato meter.
Good.
Yeah, 63% tomato meter for critics, 51% audience, which is higher than I expected. Britt R says, no words, just when I thought Tobey Maguire couldn't get any more cringy. Also, the whole damsel in distress thing in these Spider-Man movies is getting really old. 0.5 out of 5 stars. Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, just the damsel in the MJ kidnapped in the third act thing is just like, come on at this point, but...
Yeah.
It is what it is.
This is from Lassie L. Lassie says, the biggest problem is the handling of Peter Parker, which was great in the last film, who regresses in many ways. This also leads to the worst cases yet of women that are used as the film's punching bags. This has plagued the trilogy a little bit, especially bad here. 2 out of 5 stars. I don't know if they're just referring to the damsel in distress thing, but, like, yeah, in the third one in particular, they really do just kind of, like, give all the female characters the shit end of the stick, don't they?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can definitely agree with a lot of that.
Because it's not just the damsel in distress thing. Like, MJ has a bad life, and that's fine for a character to have, but, like, a lot of these female characters just kind of get shit on the whole time, and not in the same way of, like, Peter trying to struggle with his shitty life and getting his life together. They kind of just get shit on continuously from every angle.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. It doesn't do enough to kind of give them their own sort of. Because Gwen Stacy's introduced to just kind of be a prop for the games between Peter and Eddie, and then she just kind of disappears after the jazz club scene where Peter domestically abuses MJ.
Mm-hmm. After using, there
definitely needed to be another Gwen scene in the movie, I think,
or just take her out altogether,
or just take her out altogether.
Stephen C says funny, original, and romantic with like 24 exclamation points. 5 out of 5 stars. No, Stephen, this is not a good romance, and you shouldn't be modeling your notions of romance on Spider-Man 3.
But they forgive each other, Isaac. That's what romance.
If you are modeling your notions of romance on Spider-Man 3, you need to see a therapist.
You're assuming a lot about this person here. He just because they think it's romantic doesn't mean that's what he thinks the ideal relationship should be. Maybe he thinks, just in context of the story, that it's romantic. There's a difference.
I grant you neither. I award no points.
You just don't like getting one-upped. That's what this is.
It's not one-upped. I just don't like these films. I like Spider-Man 1 and elements of Spider-Man 2. Momo D, I like Spider-Man 2 for the most part. It's just a horrendous love story in it. But whatever, we've already talked that. Momo D, we'll do this as the last one. I'm too forgiving because I love Spider-Man. I'm sorry. 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Hey, you know what? You're honest, and I admire honesty.
Don't apologize, Momo D. If you like these movies, I'm happy for you. Tyler, I'm happy for you that you found a new love for all of these movies. I've certainly found a new love for the first one. I'm glad that you found something enjoyable and wonderful in these.
Yes, there's no such thing as a guilty pleasure. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You like what you like.
Unless it's illegal.
Well, I
mean... then you're literally guilty and you're going to jail.
I don't think we need to clarify that, but God knows in 2021 we probably do.
Yes. Then it's a literal guilty pleasure.
Oh, God, this is illegal.
Oh, boy. Anyway, final thoughts on Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy.
I think they stand as 3 very unique, very colorful, very vibrant, very heartfelt superhero movies. I can see myself revisiting them more now as an adult, with new eyes. You know, time has been kind to a lot of these movies, I think. I'm not shitting on the MCU. I swear I'm not. I'm a fan of the MCU. But, like, in retrospect, a lot of these pre-MCU movies, they seem to have a bit more flavor to them, a bit more directorial vision that make them stand out above the pack, even if they have their own flaws. And later on down the road, we will get to Hulk 2003. And the brilliance that is that film, and
oh boy,
and you will hear Isaac and I fight about that one as well.
You know, maybe my opinion on it will get to a complete 180. I would love that. The Hulk's my favorite comic book character. I would love to be wrong about Hulk 2003. It's been a hot minute since I've watched it.
I would love you to be wrong about it too.
I don't see it happening, but I would love for it to happen.
Stranger things have happened.
Stranger things have happened, and I've certainly flipped on things before. All right. Well, I guess that does it for this one. Good God, this is a monster of an episode. This is by far.
I had a feeling it would be once we started getting into the nitty gritty. I was like, this is going to be a big one.
Yeah,
it's going to be a big chungus.
We were at an hour after the first movie, and I was kind of hoping that just sort of set the stage for the others. But nope, we had a lot to say about each of them. Anyway, this has been Tongue and Geek, where two more white guys on the internet share their unsolicited opinions on all things geeky. Thank you for joining us. Tyler, hit us with that outro.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Spins a butt, any web, sleeps around in his sled. Look out, here comes a spider butt.
All right, bye, everybody.
See ya.